Miami at night always looks calm from a distance. The ocean is dark glass, the high-rises are dotted with soft, sleepy light, and the streets around Miami Metro Homicide glow that familiar sodium orange. Somewhere in that quiet, Dexter Morgan is driving home, the air conditioner humming, his voice in your memory as he explains his code, his need, his careful rituals, as if he's giving you a guided tour of his own darkness. On the surface, it all feels oddly soothing. Dexter's narration is calm, almost comforting, as he describes wrapping plastic, sharpening blades, choosing the right spot by the docks. The mask is so steady, so controlled, that the violence underneath starts to feel like just another part of the Miami night. Every body dropped into the bay, every blood slide tucked into that wooden box, folds into the background hum of the city. But that is not the whole story. Because while Dexter moves through the series like a ghost no one can quite see, there is always another presence in the frame, usually just off to the side. A familiar face at briefings. A sharp voice in the bullpen. A woman everyone at Metro has an opinion about, but almost no one really understands. Maria LaGuerta. You remember her as the captain, then the lieutenant, then the political climber, the one who cared about promotion boards, press conferences, and photo ops, the one the story often framed as an obstacle, a nuisance, or a threat to the characters we were taught to love. And yet, when you lay them all out together, every moment Dexter almost loses control of his secret, one name keeps coming back. LaGuerta, the person who does not look away, the one who never quite buys the neat endings everyone else is so relieved to accept. While Dexter smiles in the lab and jokes in the hallway, she is the quiet counterpoint, reading reports, revisiting old crime scene photos, remembering that the Bay Harbor butcher case never truly made sense when it ended with James Dokes. So, if Dexter is the monster we root for, what does that make the one person who kept trying to stop him? If the series invites us to relax into his perspective, to treat his code as a twisted kind of morality, what does it mean that LaGuerta is the only major character who consistently chooses justice over loyalty, even when it costs her everything? In this video, we're going to slow down and sit with that question. Settle in, get comfortable. This is the story of Maria LaGuerta's quiet war against Dexter Morgan. From those early doubts during the Bay Harbor butcher investigation, to reopening the case years later, to following the trail of bloodslides, shipping records, and dockside disappearances that point back to him. We will move through Dexter's near captures and LaGuerta's suspicions, season by season, and you start to see a different moral center of the series emerge. Not the killer with a code, but the detective who refuses to let the pattern go. By the time we reach that final shipping container and the last line she ever draws, the question will not be whether LaGuerta was the villain of Dexter's world, but whether she was the only true hero it ever had. So when we talk about LaGuerta as a possible hero, we are also talking about something more intimate and uncomfortable, the way we all learn to fall asleep beside a killer and feel safe. Dexter Morgan's world is built to be soothing. The sunlit halls of Miami Metro Homicide, the familiar coffee cups on the briefing table, the soft routine of blood reports and crime scene tape. He is polite. He brings donuts. He plays the role of the quiet, dependable colleague so well that, after a few episodes, you start to feel that his double life is not just thrilling, but strangely reassuring. Because the danger is contained. It has rules. There is a code. And every single night, he goes home, opens that wooden box of blood slides, and the ritual tells you that the monster is, at least for now, under control. But this is the story of a mask that is always slipping. The series never lets you fully relax. A lost blood slide in a drain. A boat spotted where it should not be. Dokes tailing him. Rita's ex-husband realizing the frame job. Deb walking into the church at the exact wrong moment. Every close call, every near miss, every time the line between Dexter's two lives blurs. The show gives you that quick spike of panic and then pulls you back to safety. It becomes addictive, this cycle of almost exposure and relief. And when you lay them all out together, you start to see another pattern. People notice. Again and again, people feel that something about Dexter is wrong. Dokes sees the predator. Paul sees the setup. Even Rita, holding that shoe that proves Paul's story, has the chance to follow the evidence. Most of them step back. They choose love, or convenience, or workplace peace over what their instincts are telling them. LaGuerta is one of the few who does not step back. From the Bay Harbor butcher case onward, she is the person in the room who refuses to accept the tidy answer. Dokes, as the butcher, never sits right with her. The blood slides, the cabin explosion, the timing of his death, she files it away, and years later, she quietly reopens the wound. While everyone else has made their peace with the official story, she is the one who treats that unease as a responsibility. This is where the deeper anxiety lives. LaGuerta's pursuit of Dexter touches a fear that is not really about serial killers at all. It is about the possibility that the person you trust most, the one who makes you feel safe, is hiding something unthinkable. A partner, a sibling, a coworker who brings pastries and remembers birthdays. When she starts following Dexter to the docks, to the church, to that final shipping container, the comfort of his world begins to look less like stability and more like denial. So settle in, get comfortable, because we are going to walk through those close calls one by one. And as we do, LaGuerta's choices will start to look less like annoying office politics and more like a kind of lonely heroism that the series itself is almost afraid to acknowledge. And that lonely heroism starts in an unexpected place. Because, for a long time, the way you meet Maria LaGuerta is not as a hero at all, but as background noise inside Miami Metro homicide. She is the captain who cares about press conferences, promotion boards, and whose name ends up on the plaque. She cuts Batista off in meetings, undercuts Deborah, and seems to hover around Dexter, mostly to pull him into politics he wants to avoid. On a first watch, you start to see her as the office antagonist. She is the one blocking transfers, angling for the lieutenant's job, worrying about how the Bay Harbor butcher case will make the department look. Next to Morgan's soft voiceovers and carefully curated awkwardness, LaGuerta reads as hard. Calculating, even self-interested. The series invites you to relax when Dexter outmaneuvers her, as if the story is gently telling you that the right outcome is always the one where he keeps his secret. But that is not the whole story. When you lay them all out together, her decisions form a very different pattern. This is the story of someone who keeps pushing for answers, promotions, and justice in the same breath, because she understands that institutional power is the only thing that can stand between a city and the monsters it refuses to see. She is ambitious, yes, but she uses that ambition to reopen closed files, to question neat narratives, to say out loud that Dokes being the butcher never fully made sense. Where Dexter has a code that turns killing into a private ritual, LaGuerta has a moral compass that always swings back toward process. She believes in evidence, in chain of custody, in the idea that if someone in their own building is the Bay Harbor butcher, then Miami Metro homicide has a responsibility to find him, not quietly accept a dead scapegoat. Every time she pushes a search warrant, orders surveillance, or calls out a conflict of interest, the show frames it as meddling. Inside the fiction, it is the only sane response. Now, let's look at how the framing works. We live inside Dexter's head, hear his relief when LaGuerta gets distracted, feel his irritation when she reopens the case. The camera lingers on his mask slipping, not on her instincts sharpening. So when she finds a fresh blood slide and quietly links it back to the original Bay Harbor pattern, the tension you feel is for Dexter's safety, not for the integrity of her investigation. If you reverse that, something shifts. Imagine rewatching every season with LaGuerta as the protagonist and Morgan as the looming, unseen threat in her life. Every time she walks into the bullpen, there's a killer at the next desk. Every time she signs off on a case, there's a chance she is helping him hide. And as we move into her final investigation, settle in, get comfortable, because we are going to see just how close she comes to dragging that truth into the light before the darkness closes over her instead. So to trace that darkness closing in, we're going to map this hunt carefully, season by season, almost like LaGuerta herself is building a case file that you can fall asleep inside. First, we will move through the early years at Miami Metro Homicide, when LaGuerta's focus is not yet on Dexter Morgan, but the groundwork is being laid. This is the story of background radiation, the Bay Harbor butcher investigation, the way evidence points toward an insider with a boat, the way Dokes is offered up as a perfect suspect, and the way LaGuerta is the only one who refuses to let his guilt sit comfortably. We will pause on those moments where she notices small inconsistencies and everyone else chooses the easier story. From there, we will follow her into the long, quiet stretch, the seasons when the butcher case is officially closed, but not closed in her mind. Each major almost caught moment will be broken down calmly. What happened on screen, who noticed, how Dexter slipped away, and what LaGuerta quietly records in that mental ledger she never stops updating. Every close call, every near miss, every time the mask almost comes off. When you lay them all out together, you start to see how one woman's memory becomes more dangerous than any forensic test. Then, we will slow down even further for her final investigation in Season 7, where she reopens Bay Harbor and starts connecting Dexter to the docks, to the church, and finally, to that last shipping container. Let's sit with each step, the fresh blood slide that should not exist, the surveillance orders that risk her career, the way she keeps choosing justice over loyalty, even as colleagues roll their eyes. The pacing here will be deliberate and sleep-friendly, returning again and again to the thin line between what people think they know about Morgan and what LaGuerta is willing to see. At certain points, we will step out of Miami and into the revival era, into a world without LaGuerta. That contrast will act like a quiet pattern interrupt, the same man, the same impulses, but no one at the next desk who is steadily tightening the net. You will notice how easily Dexter drifts when there is no institutional memory pushing back, no captain ready to say, "This doesn't fit," and refuse to drop it. By the end, when you lay all these close calls side by side, you start to see a pattern instead of isolated scares, a single woman moving against the current of her own department, tightening her grip on a man everyone else trusted. Settle in, get comfortable, because now we can walk with her from the first doubt to the final, fatal proof. So before we follow her into the real darkness, we are going to slow the pace just a little. Think of the rest of this video as a long, quiet night shift at Miami Metro Homicide. The fluorescent lights are humming, the evidence boards are half full, and there is more paperwork than anyone wants to admit. You are here at the edge of Dexter Morgan's world, not racing from kill to kill, but listening as the pieces of a much larger story slide softly into place. Settle in, get comfortable. Let's treat this like the kind of case that lives in the background of the precinct for years, the one no one wants to reopen, because it asks too many questions about who they trusted. LaGuerta is at her desk in the corner of your mind, pulling old files, circling names, refusing to let the Bay Harbor butcher stay a solved line in a forgotten report. If you want more of this kind of slow, ambient investigation into complicated characters, this is where subscribing actually matters. Not as a loud call to action, but as a quiet vote for long-form breakdowns, for videos that take their time with a series, that sit with the uncomfortable idea that the supposed obstacles to our favorite anti-hero might be the only people doing their jobs. And when you turn on notifications, you are essentially choosing to be on the next night shift with us, ready when the next suspect file lands on the desk. This is the story of people in Dexter's orbit who noticed something was wrong and paid a price for saying so. Keeping up with each episode-length analysis lets you follow every moment of that pattern without losing the thread. Your engagement becomes part of the investigation, too. Every like, every comment, every time you share a scene you remember differently now, it all builds a small community of viewers willing to re-examine familiar seasons from angles that are not always comfortable. We are not just asking, how did Dexter get away with it? We are asking, who tried to stop him, and why did we ignore them? As we move forward, start keeping mental notes. Each time LaGuerta is right and the room goes quiet, each time she raises Dexter's name and someone waves it off, each time Morgan's mask slips for a second, a bad alibi, a strange reaction, a crime scene that lines up a little too neatly, and the moment passes because no one wants the implication. When you lay them all out together, you start to see how relentless her pattern really is. Now, let's go back to the beginning, to the first small ripples of suspicion in a city that did not want to see what was standing in the middle of Miami Metro, smiling, carrying donuts, and hiding a body count from the very beginning. Dexter Morgan's confidence depends on one simple belief. No one is really looking at him. He walks into Miami Metro Homicide as the friendly blood spatter analyst, the man who turns chaos into clean diagrams, and he walks out into the dark as a meticulous serial killer, convinced that his day job is the perfect camouflage for his night work. Season 1 leans into that comfort. Dexter has his code, his rituals, his slides. He has Deborah as an unwitting shield, Rita as the soft alibi of domestic normalcy, and an entire department that treats him as harmless. And every single night, he goes home, opens that wooden box, and reassures himself that the mask is holding. But that is where Maria LaGuerta quietly enters the story. On paper, she is not the hunter of monsters. She is the commanding officer, managing politics, media, and the escalating panic around the ice truck killer. Her days are filled with press conferences, commissioner calls, and performance metrics. She clashes with Deb, she undercuts colleagues, she plays favorites. It is easy, almost encouraged, for you to see her as a self-interested bureaucrat rather than a threat to Dexter. The irony is that those same ambitions put her exactly where she needs to be. Because LaGuerta wants results. High-profile ones. She wants the big case closed, the cameras pointed at her, the mayor satisfied. And to get that, she has to live in the same spaces Dexter uses to hide. Case briefings, where his analysis shapes the narrative, crime scenes where his quiet competence makes him indispensable, strategy meetings where his insights become the backbone of the investigation. Watch those early ice truck killer episodes, and you start to see it. She is not studying Dexter yet, but her attention keeps brushing past him. She pushes the team to move faster, to lean on forensics, to translate blood into story for the press. Every time she demands a clean theory, Dexter provides one. Every time she insists on a coherent pattern, he offers exactly the pattern that keeps him invisible. This is the story of a structural near miss. The more LaGuerta chases big, solvable narratives, the more she rewards the one person in the room who can manufacture them on command. Her ambition pulls her closer to Dexter's work product, to his patterns, to the quiet fingerprints of his mind on Miami's worst crimes, long before she ever considers him as a suspect. When you lay them all out together, those season 1 moments feel different. The way she praises his brilliance in front of the squad, the way she leans on his reconstructions at the refrigerated crime scenes, the way her career calculations keep placing her at the head of cases where Dexter is already, secretly, a participant. Settle in, get comfortable, because this is the long game the series is playing. From day one, LaGuerta is positioned as the one person with both the authority and the proximity to connect the dots. The only question is whether she will live long enough to let that initial accidental closeness harden into suspicion. And then Miami gets a name for the thing Dexter has been doing in the dark. The Bay Harbor Butcher, a phrase that turns his private ritual of plastic, knives, and ocean currents into a public nightmare, splashed across news reports and whispered in every hallway of Miami Metro homicide. For years, Morgan has treated the Atlantic like a filing cabinet, assuming the water will keep his secrets. The currents, the depth, the wildlife. All of it part of an unspoken extension of Harry's code. But storms do not care about codes. A diver does not care about Dexter's careful wrapping. When those trash bags rupture and the bodies surface, what Dexter thinks of as order and justice becomes, for everyone else, a mass grave with a single signature. This is the story of a man who thinks he has contained his darkness, and a department that suddenly realizes the ocean is giving their failures back. From LaGuerta's perspective, there is nothing romantic about it. No vigilante fantasy, no quiet respect for someone doing what the system cannot. She is the lieutenant whose city is now terrified of a serial killer who hunts under her watch. Every press conference, every briefing, every question from the mayor is a reminder that this is not an abstract puzzle. It is a professional indictment. So, when the Bay Harbor Butcher Task Force forms, LaGuerta is not just in the room. She is at the head of the table. She oversees the evidence boards, listens to the FBI profile describing a forensically skilled insider with access to crime scenes and a boat, and manages the politics of a department that would very much like this problem to go away quickly. We are going to see her juggle agents, detectives, reporters, and union reps, all while trying to hold a coherent line: find the killer, protect the city, protect the badge. And somewhere in the back of that room, Dexter quietly processes a different set of stakes. For him, the Bay Harbor Butcher is not a stranger. It is his mask turned inside out. He retreats into Harry's rules, the justifications he repeats to himself. They were killers. They escaped justice. He is simply balancing the scales. When you lay them all out together, every slide, every wrapped body, you start to see how much he needs that narrative to survive. LaGuerta does not have access to his inner monologue. What she has are bodies, timelines, and the sharp, simple fact that someone chose to kill again and again. Her reality is external. Families asking for answers. Cameras outside the building. A community that does not care whether the victims were criminals. They only see that someone is butchering people and dumping them like trash. The case will close. Officially, neatly, on paper, the butcher will be identified, blamed, and buried. But there is a small, almost invisible decision LaGuerta makes in the aftermath. She does not fully let it go. Now, let's stay with that thread, because the next time it pulls, it will not just tug at her career. It will pull directly on Dexter Morgan. It will pull directly on Dexter Morgan. Because before that pull ever becomes a full investigation, it passes through one man who should have been the end of the story. Sergeant James Dokes. The perfect suspect. The perfect shield. From the outside, Dokes fits the role almost too well. He is aggressive, volatile, openly hostile to Dexter in a way that makes everyone at Miami Metro Homicide uncomfortable. Every moment he glowers at Morgan across the lab, every time he snaps at him in front of the squad, the series is quietly writing a narrative in your mind. If someone in this building is going to explode into violence, it will be Dokes, not the quiet blood guy with donuts. This is the story of how that expectation becomes a weapon. Dexter leans into it. The show leans into it. Dokes tails Morgan, breaks into his apartment, finds the blood slides. On paper, it is almost elegant. You have a decorated sergeant with a temper, a history of black ops, a secret collection of trophies. When you lay them all out together, you start to see how easy it is for the FBI, for the media, for the public to accept him as the Bay Harbor Butcher. But LaGuerta cannot make that leap. Not cleanly. Not with the man she knew. We are going to sit with that for a second, because her connection to Dokes is not just professional. They came up in the department together. She promoted him, defended him, understood the discipline under the anger in a way most of Miami Metro never bothered to. Where others saw an unstable cop, she saw a soldier trying to operate by a strict internal code in a messy civilian world. So when the cabin explodes and the evidence points straight at Dokes, LaGuerta feels something that does not fit in an evidence locker. Doubt around her, the machinery moves in the opposite direction. The FBI profile is close enough. The blood slides are definitive enough. The burned body in the Everglades is tragic enough. Institutional pressure says the same thing from every angle. Close the file, hold the press conference, give the city its monster. Reporters get their clean ending, the brass get their solved case, and even Debra, grieving and exhausted, accepts the convenience of it. LaGuerta does not entirely. She signs the paperwork, she stands at the podium, but internally, she refuses to cross that last line of belief. She keeps Dokes as she knew him in one hand and the official story in the other. And the two never quite locked together. That small misalignment is the seed. Years later, it will grow into her decision to quietly reopen the Bay Harbor Butcher case. For now, though, the image is deceptively calm. Dexter Morgan back at his desk, the butcher file stamped and shelved, the squad room humming with routine. And in the corner, LaGuerta watching him just a fraction too long, holding on to a quiet, persistent sense that something in this story does not add up. A decade later, the squad room has moved on. New cases, new faces, a fresh layer of paint over the same old walls at Miami Metro Homicide. The Bay Harbor Butcher is a cautionary tale they tell in passing. A solved horror story with a neat ending. James Dokes, the perfect monster to fit the crimes. But anniversaries have a way of loosening memories. And on the 10-year mark of Dokes' death, LaGuerta does something almost no one else in this series ever does. She goes back, not to the crime scenes at first, but to the paperwork, to the files everyone agreed meant the story was over. We are going to sit with her in that quiet office for a moment, because this is where her heroism actually begins. No gun drawn, no chase, just a woman in front of a stack of binders, opening a case that her department, her city, and even her friends have emotionally locked away. She is choosing, very deliberately, to question a narrative that has become institutional comfort. She flips through photos of the cabin, the exploded remains, the recovered blood slides. The official story says Dokes was the Bay Harbor Butcher and kept trophies of his victims. On paper, it fits. Until you start to see the seams. How does a suspect under surveillance, constantly tailed, managed to plant his own blood slides in a hidden box at Dexter Morgan's apartment, and then somehow relocate that same signature collection to a remote cabin before dying there. That is the first hairline crack. A logistics problem. A chain of custody question. LaGuerta does not wave it away as dramatic coincidence. She pulls the evidence logs, checks dates, compares who signed what and when. She lines up the timeline of when Dexter reported the slides stolen, when Dokes disappeared, when the cabin burned. And when you lay them all out together, the neat story starts to look less like truth and more like a very convenient ending. This is the story of a cop who refuses to run on instinct alone. She calls for the original forensic reports, rereads the FBI profile that described a forensically skilled insider with access to the marina, to the lab, to every scene. She notices how perfectly that profile once pointed at someone like Dexter, and how quickly everyone stopped looking once Dokes was gone. In a series where almost everyone else lets affection, loyalty, or fear close their eyes, LaGuerta does the opposite. She reopens hers. Quietly, methodically, she stops being background political noise and becomes the only person at Miami Metro actively pulling on the one thread that, if followed to the end, can only lead to Dexter Morgan. Settle in, get comfortable, because from this point on, every new piece of evidence she touches is going to drag his mask closer to the edge of coming off. And almost as soon as she does that, the universe hands her something that should not exist. We are going to the crime scene, where LaGuerta's doubt stops being abstract and becomes physical, tangible, sitting in front of her on a piece of plastic. It's season 7, the aftermath of a very ordinary Miami murder by this show's standards. Patrol has the perimeter up, Sisu is doing their slow, methodical sweep, and the hum of Miami Metro homicide feels routine. Another body, another long night. Everyone else is thinking paperwork and overtime. LaGuerta bends down, because she still actually looks. And there it is on the ground, near a drain. A tiny, pristine glass slide with a perfect smear of blood at its center. Clean edges, careful placement, the same minimalist, almost ritualistic presentation we remember from the Bay Harbor butcher case. It is visually identical to the evidence that once filled an FBI conference room wall and defined an entire season of this series. But that is the problem. This slide cannot be here. If Sergeant Dokes was really the butcher, if the story everyone agreed to is true, then the ritual died with him in that cabin explosion. The case was closed, the profile retired, the marina quietly forgotten. There is no version of reality where a dead man resumes his work and politely leaves his signature calling card for Miami Metro to catalog. LaGuerta understands that instantly. She does not panic. She does not announce a breakthrough. Instead, you start to see her focus narrow, her whole presence tighten around this one impossible object. The camera lingers on her face, because this is the moment she realizes the official narrative is not just flawed, it is actively wrong. Someone is still doing this. Someone with the same meticulous habits, the same need to commemorate blood in glass. For us, watching, the connection is immediate. We know that this is Dexter Morgan's private ritual, the thing he does in the quiet after every kill. When the mask comes off and he lets himself feel whatever it is he feels, the slide is his trophy, his confession, his story of that night reduced to a single red streak. When you lay them all out together in his wooden box, you see a life's work of violence. Categorized, LaGuerta does not have that box. Not yet. What she has is a single data point that refuses to fit. And because she is who she is, she does not smooth it over to protect the department's pride or her own past decisions. She does the opposite. She lets this one slide reopen every question she ever had about Bay Harbor, about Dokes, about the convenient neatness of that resolution. From here, her investigation stops being a quiet anniversary project and becomes a live hunt. She may not be able to say Dexter's name out loud yet, but this is the point where, internally, he moves from background colleague to primary suspect. Now, let's follow what she does with that suspicion, and how every step she takes brings her closer to the one place Dexter cannot afford anyone to stand. So, from that internal shift, from quiet doubt to active hunt, we are going to watch LaGuerta do something almost no one else in this series ever really does with Dexter Morgan. She treats him the way she would treat any other potential suspect. Not as a colleague, not as the friendly blood guy at Miami Metro Homicide, as a problem to be solved. She starts with paper and pixels, shipping records, container schedules, marina leases, access logs, archive surveillance from the docks. On their own, each dataset is just noise, the background hum of a city that never really sleeps. But when you lay them all out together, you start to see how the Bay Harbor Butcher's disposal sites form a pattern that keeps circling the same stretch of water. The same marinas, the same late-night windows where bodies seem to vanish into the ocean. And in the middle of that pattern, a familiar name keeps surfacing: Dexter Morgan. His boat registration places him in the exact marinas that were once quietly flagged during the original Bay Harbor investigation. His keycard access shows him leaving Miami Metro late, over and over, on nights when no case demands it. His phone records and GPS pings graze crime scenes and disposal zones with a regularity that stops looking like coincidence and starts looking like routine. By daylight, he is still the man bringing donuts into the squad room. At night, on LaGuerta's laptop, he is a series of timestamps and coordinates that do not make sense for an ordinary analyst. This is the story of a mask that only holds if no one bothers to check the logs. So she escalates. Quietly, she orders new surveillance on the docks, frames it as a general security concern, and then does the thing that really puts her at risk. She goes there herself. Sitting alone in an unmarked car, engine off, windows cracked, just enough to hear the distant slap of water against hull, she stakes out the place Dexter believes is invisible. It is a simple image, almost boring on the surface, and that is why it is so dangerous. There is a pattern interrupt here. For once, we are not watching Dexter stalk. We are watching someone stalk Dexter. Night after night, she waits. Headlights drift past, boats rock, the city glows behind her. Every moment is a coin flip between nothing happening and everything changing. More than once, timing saves him by inches. A call from Deb, a delayed victim, a minor crisis at Miami Metro that pulls LaGuerta away minutes before Dexter backs the slice of life out into the channel. Let's stay with how close this really gets, because by following the current of his habits to the docks, LaGuerta has arrived at the one threshold he cannot afford anyone to cross. From here, all it will take is one clean overlap between her surveillance and his ritual, and the Bay Harbor Butcher stops being a ghost story and becomes a man she can name. And that is exactly what she starts reaching for next, a way to force Dexter's routine into the open, where even he cannot hide it behind paperwork and charm. So, when the Bay Harbor Butcher file leads her to Dexter's routine, it is almost inevitable that the trail will circle back to a church. The Doomsday Killer arc has already turned that abandoned chapel into a crossroads where Morgan's two lives collide: by day, Miami Metro Homicide's most reliable analyst; by night, the man who quietly repurposes a place of worship into his own private killing floor. The church in Season 6 is where Travis Marshall stages his apocalyptic tableau, where official investigation and religious spectacle meet. It is also where Dexter drags the case off the rails, kidnapping Travis, chaining him to the altar, and trying to script an ending that fits his code instead of the law. When you lay them all out together, every tableau, every missing window of time, you start to see that this building is less a crime scene and more a mirror held up to Dexter's theology of control. By the time LaGuerta returns, the church is a burned-out shell. The doomsday case is closed. Travis is dead. Deborah has been promoted. On paper, there is no reason for a captain to be standing in the ashes of a concluded investigation. And yet she is there, walking through the blackened pews, the charred altar, looking for something the fire did not erase. This is the story of a woman who refuses to trust convenient endings. She knows arson is often used to wipe away the truth. She also knows Dexter was at the center of that final night, hovering near Deb, near the man who supposedly took his own life. So she does what almost no one else in this series bothers to do with Dexter Morgan. She rewinds the tape instead of accepting his summary. She pulls timelines. She revisits witness statements. She notes that Dexter's phone goes dark at key intervals, that his account of finding Travis on the rooftop does not sit comfortably with the physical evidence, that he always seems to be both indispensable and inexplicably adjacent when monsters fall. It is not one piece of proof. It is the way every small inconsistency bends in the same direction. Standing in that ruined church, LaGuerta feels the pattern tightening. Dokes, the docks, the shipping container, now this sanctuary turned slaughterhouse. Different killers, different seasons, same quiet blood spatter analyst within arm's reach of the worst horrors Miami has to offer. The mask is still on, but from her angle, the edges are starting to lift. And because she is alone in this, the realization lands with a particular weight. There is no task force, no partner eager to chase a hunch that implicates the department's favorite son. There is just LaGuerta, her long memory, and a growing conviction that Dexter is not merely present at these storms. He is their eye. Now, let's follow what happens when she stops treating that feeling as paranoia and starts building a case that can survive daylight. Season 7 is where Dexter Morgan's invincibility finally starts to crack, not because he slips up in some spectacular way, but because one person quietly refuses to let the old story stay closed. This is the season where LaGuerta stops being background politics at Miami Metro Homicide and becomes the slow, steady pressure that never goes away. She begins in the archives, not the spotlight. A fresh blood slide at a new crime scene pulls her back to Bay Harbor, and instead of accepting the convenient answers everyone else has lived with, she goes back to first principles. She rereads the FBI profile that described a forensically skilled insider with a boat. She remembers Dokes, the man she knew, not the monster the department needed him to be. And when you lay them all out together, the coincidences around Dexter stop feeling random and start to look like a pattern. So, she does the work no one wants. She re-interviews witnesses from the original Butcher investigation, quietly asking what they remember about timing, access, and who was around. She revisits old dump sites and the marina, tracing the line between body disposal and Dexter's slip number. She orders surveillance on docks and shipping records, not with a task force announcement, but with careful, almost whispered directives that never quite make it into the official minutes. Because she understands something crucial. If this theory is right, then the danger is not just external. It lives inside Miami Metro. So she balances everything. On paper, she is still the captain, managing budgets, mediating disputes, and smiling through press conferences. Off the books, She is pulling files, testing blood-slide chains of custody, and watching Dexter's movements around the church, the docks, the places where bodies and evidence keep intersecting with his life. From the outside, it looks obsessive. Deborah sees her as a political climber, chasing ghosts to rewrite the Bay Harbor narrative. Batista worries she is reopening an old wound that cost them a friend. Colleagues mutter that she is fixated, that she cannot accept that Dokes was dirty. The irony is quiet, but sharp. The more correct she becomes, the more unstable she appears to everyone around her. Episode by episode, you start to see the split. Dexter is improvising. Deb is spiraling. The rest of the squad is circling smaller cases and personal drama. LaGuerta is the only one moving in a straight, unwavering line toward the truth. This is the story of a woman who treats a hunch like a hypothesis and then refuses to stop testing it, even as it isolates her. Settle in, get comfortable with that idea, because Season 7 belongs to her. And as we follow her deeper into this off-the-books investigation, we're going to watch the comforting fiction around Dexter erode, one quiet, meticulous choice at a time. And that brings us to the night when all that quiet work stops being theoretical and becomes physical, dangerous, real. The Bay Harbor Butcher is no longer a closed file on LaGuerta's desk. He's a living presence she believes is walking around Miami Metro homicide, and the trail she's following leads her somewhere very specific, the shipping yards. We start in that industrial twilight, sodium vapor lights buzzing overhead, stacked containers forming narrow metal corridors, the distant echo of cranes and water lapping against pilings. It's the same kind of space where Dexter Morgan has done some of his cleanest work, and when you lay them all out together, these docks, these boats, these hidden corners, you start to see how much of his story is written along the waterline. LaGuerta arranges surveillance here with the same precision Dexter uses to arrange a kill room. She pulls shipping records, connects Hector Estrada's name to this location, and understands that if the real Bay Harbor Butcher is still active, he will eventually circle back to the man who was in that childhood container with Dexter. So she does something most people at Miami Metro would never bother to do. She sits in the dark and waits. This is not a grand task force. It's not a big, loud raid. It's a captain in an unmarked car, watching, recording, following a chain of logic that began with a single out-of-place blood slide and has now led her to a single, very dangerous night. We're going to stay with her here, because this is the moment where suspicion becomes confrontation. She sees movement, a figure where there should not be one. Not Estrada, not uniformed officers, not a scheduled operation. Dexter Morgan at night. At the exact place and time where a fugitive connected to his own origin trauma is supposed to die. He offers explanations later, of course. A call from Deborah, a concern about a case, a coincidence. But in that first instant, framed in the harsh glow of the yard lights, there is no convincing reason for a blood spatter analyst to be wandering a high-risk scene alone. The mask slips, not because he says anything, but because his mere presence completes LaGuerta's equation. In her mind, this is the confirmation. Dexter isn't just adjacent to these cases, the way everyone has always preferred to believe. He's moving inside them, anticipating suspects, arriving before police, appearing at docks, at churches, at containers, as if he is part of the crime's internal machinery rather than its cleanup crew. And so something very quiet shifts. From this point on, LaGuerta is not dealing with a colleague. She is dealing with a suspect. She decides, internally and irrevocably, that Dexter Morgan must be arrested, that the Bay Harbor Butcher is standing in her squad room. The tragedy is that she is right. The danger is that Dexter and Debra now know she is right. And in a series like this, once the hunter and the hunted both understand what game they are playing, the next move is never gentle. So when the next move finally comes, it is not gentle at all. It is LaGuerta walking into Miami Metro Homicide on Christmas Eve, not as a colleague, not as a politician, but as an arresting officer, and the name on the warrant is Dexter Morgan. You remember the look on his face. Dexter is standing there in the middle of the squad room, framed by the desks and whiteboards and holiday decorations, and for once, the mask does not crack in private, on a dark dock or in an abandoned building. It cracks under fluorescent lights, in front of everyone. His eyes widen, just a fraction. His hand twitches. For a single, suspended moment, the hunter is the one surrounded. Around him, the disbelief is almost louder than the dialogue. Batista protests. Deborah sputters. The room tilts as colleagues who have trusted Dexter's analysis on every case now have to imagine him in handcuffs. This is the inversion the series has been holding back for 7 seasons. The blood guy, the quiet helper, the stable center of the story, suddenly recast as the suspect. On a meta level, this is the show breaking its own unspoken rule. Most long-running series are careful about how far they let consequences touch their lead. You can threaten them, you can wound them, you can shake their world, but actually hauling the protagonist out in front of their entire support system and saying, "You might be the monster," is different. It is the story looking at itself and asking whether it has the courage to follow its own logic. LaGuerta is the one who forces that question. She is not just arresting a character, she is arresting the narrative's favorite illusion. We're going to see just how much pressure it takes to make a world built around Dexter admit what he is, and she does it knowing exactly how beloved he is, both in the department and, quietly, in the audience's mind. This is courage of a very specific kind. She risks her reputation, her political capital, and the fragile goodwill of a team that already thinks she is ambitious, calculating, hard to like. When you lay them all out together, every earlier doubt she voiced about the Bay Harbor butcher, every time she defended Dokes, every late-night file she reopened, you start to see that this arrest is not impulsive. It is the culmination of a long, lonely investigation. And the backlash is immediate. People do not just question her evidence, they question her motives. Colleagues roll their eyes, Debra undermines her at every turn, and even the camera seems to side with Dexter as we watch him improvise a way out. The institution closes ranks around the image of the helpful analyst, because it is easier to believe that LaGuerta is overreaching than that their friend is a serial killer. But this is the story of one of LaGuerta's most heroic acts. She refuses to be intimidated by narrative expectations or by institutional loyalty. The evidence points to a friend, so she moves on the friend. Now, let's follow what happens when the story itself decides that was a step too far. The story pushes back. The moment LaGuerta moves on the friend, Dexter Morgan stops being a man hiding in the shadows and becomes something much colder, a cornered predator rearranging the entire environment around his hunter. He does not meet her investigation head-on. He dissolves into the procedures he knows better than anyone at Miami Metro Homicide. We are going to watch him turn the rulebook itself into a weapon. He plants the new blood slide at the crime scene that draws LaGuerta back to the Bay Harbor butcher pattern. He stages the waterfront encounter with Estrada so it looks like LaGuerta is dragging an old case into the present for no reason. Every move is designed so that when you lay them all out together, her questions appear like noise and his explanations look like order. Dexter leans on something LaGuerta can never fully access, the intimacy of trust. He has years of donuts, jokes, late-night lab work with Masuka, quiet support for Deb, all banked like emotional capital. When he suggests LaGuerta is fixated, that reopening the Butcher case is about clearing dokes rather than following evidence. People accept it with almost embarrassing ease. You start to see how he uses her own reputation against her. The same political instincts that once made her seem calculating now become the story. Of course she is chasing ghosts. Of course she is trying to rewrite history. LaGuerta, by contrast, is chained to process. She has to file the request, log the surveillance, justify the overtime. She needs documentation, corroboration, signatures. Dexter needs none of that. He can forge a warrant copy, alter a timestamp, move a body, or kill a witness. She is bound to the visible. He thrives in what never makes it into the file. That asymmetry turns every step she takes into an almost unwinnable climb. When she pulls the shipping records that put Dexter's boat near the original dump sites, he simply adjusts his story and lets her look paranoid for connecting dots any boater could match. When she sets up the GP's tracker on his car, he finds it, feeds it false locations, and walks her investigation in circles. The system demands she be cautious. His survival demands he be ruthless. And yet, she does not stop. This is the story of a woman who keeps walking into a maze that rearranges itself behind her, convinced that if she just keeps going, there will be a center. Settle in, get comfortable, because every piece of truth she drags into the light forces Dexter to darken in response. By the time she reaches the docks and the church, by the time she is standing in that final shipping container, the mask and the man are almost indistinguishable. Now, let's follow how that collision becomes inevitable. That collision does not happen in a vacuum. It happens inside a building that has spent years convincing itself that Dexter Morgan is the safest person in the room. For over a decade, he walks into Miami Metro homicide with coffee, with quiet competence, with that slightly awkward charm that makes people underestimate him. He is the guy who stays late, fixes your report, and remembers your birthday. Workplace familiarity is its own kind of armor. When you lay them all out together, every small favor, every shared joke, every crisis where Dexter comes through, you start to see how a narrative forms around him. He is helpful, calm under pressure, oddly unflappable at crime scenes, and that becomes comforting. In a place where everyone is drowning in blood and grief, the man who never seems rattled feels like a stabilizing force, not a threat. And once a story like that hardens, it takes a lot to crack it. The Bay Harbor Butcher case gives Miami Metro a perfect release valve. They label Dokes the monster, they find the blood slides, they get the explosion in the cabin, and the case is solved. Closure is officially stamped. Promotion speeches are given. Files are boxed. From that point on, every new piece of unease has somewhere to go that is not Dexter. This is the story of confirmation bias doing its quiet work. If a fresh blood slide appears, it is an anomaly, not a pattern. If Dexter's name brushes against a shipping record or a crime scene, it is a coincidence, not a clue. The institution has already decided what the truth is, and anything that contradicts it is treated as noise rather than signal. Into that atmosphere walks LaGuerta, a captain known for ambition, survival instincts, and political savvy. The same qualities that helped her navigate the brutal hierarchy of Miami Metro now make it easy to question her motives. When she reopens the Bay Harbor Butcher file, people do not ask, "What if she's right?" They ask, "What is she angling for? A legacy case? A headline? A final promotion?" It is more comfortable to believe this is about her ego than about their failure. So, we are going to notice the small social pressures that surround her. Colleagues change the subject in the break room. Batista gently urges her to move on, to let Dokes rest, to protect the harmony they have built. Matthews warns her about stirring up old scandals. Even Deb, drowning in her own guilt, frames LaGuerta's pursuit as harassment rather than investigation. Every moment, the message is the same. Stop. Stop looking at Dexter. Stop threatening the story that keeps everyone feeling safe. LaGuerta is not just pushing against Morgan's mask. She is pushing against an entire culture of denial that would rather live with a comforting lie than face a truth that implicates all of them. And the more she refuses to back down, the more that culture quietly, almost politely, moves to erase her. Now, let's watch what it costs her to keep going. So when that culture of denial turns against LaGuerta, it does not just isolate her from Miami Metro homicide. It pushes her straight into conflict with the one person who should have been her natural ally, Dexter Morgan. This is the story of two women staring at the same darkness and being pulled in opposite directions. Deb is already compromised before LaGuerta ever knocks on her door. She has seen Dexter on the table. She has watched the knife in his hand. She has listened to him explain the code as if it were a twisted extension of their shared trauma instead of a confession. On paper, she is a lieutenant sworn to uphold the law. In practice, she is now the person who dragged her brother out of a burning church to hide what he did. That means every moment LaGuerta leans in, Deb is forced to lean away. We're going to watch her split in two. In the interrogation room, she is the sharp, foul-mouthed cop we remember, pushing back on LaGuerta's theories about the Bay Harbor butcher with professional disdain. At home, she is chain-smoking, replaying dock footage, trying to calculate how many lies it will take to keep Dexter safe, without completely erasing the person she thought she was. LaGuerta, for her part, does something quietly devastating. She reaches out to Deb, not as a rival, but as a woman she believes is still on the right side of the line. When you lay them all out together, those scenes form a pattern. The visit to Deb's house, framed as concern about her stress. The questions about why Deb was at the church fire. The gentle suggestion that maybe Dokes was not the butcher after all, and that someone else at Metro might be responsible. You start to see the tragic irony. LaGuerta is trying to pull Deb out of the gravity well of Dexter's world to give her a way to step back into the clear. Procedural light of the job. Deb hears all of it as a threat to the only person she cannot afford to lose, so she tampers with gas logs to fake an obsession with the church case. She stages evidence to make herself look unstable instead of complicit. She chooses self-destruction over cooperation because cooperation now equals betrayal. And through it all, LaGuerta keeps offering her an exit ramp, a private conversation, a chance to come clean, a moment to say, "You're right." Deb keeps taking those moments and weaponizing them against the woman who is actually trying to save her. Settle in, get comfortable, because that tension is not theoretical. It is walking both of them toward a shipping container where there will be no more evasions, no more half-truths, and one irreversible decision that will finally reveal which loyalty Dexter Morgan has chosen to live and die by. Now, let's step inside that container. We are going to slow the frame down for a moment, because what is really happening here is bigger than a single confrontation. This is where the show's favorite metaphor, that thin line between mask and monster, finally stops being abstract and becomes geography. One side of the container is family, loyalty, the story Dexter tells himself about why he kills. The other side is LaGuerta, standing for the part of the world that refuses to be charmed. From the pilot onward, Dexter Morgan narrates his own life as a performance. He calls it his mask, his act, his imitation of normalcy. He talks about the dark passenger, as if it were a separate tenant riding along inside him, something he can manage with Harry's code, and a careful routine at Miami Metro Homicide. Daylight Dexter smiles, brings donuts, jokes with Masuka. Nighttime Dexter wraps rooms in plastic and turns human beings into slides. But that is only half the story, because the mask only works if everyone agrees to pretend it is real. When you lay them all out together, you start to see how many characters choose the mask over the monster. Rita sees the gentle boyfriend, not the man who framed her ex. Deborah sees the big brother who saved her life, not the killer she literally walks in on. Even Dokes, who feels the predator underneath, never quite gets to strip away Dexter's language about control and necessity. LaGuerta is different. She is the one character who refuses to accept the mask at face value when lives and justice are at stake. From the Bay Harbor butcher case to the 10th anniversary files, she keeps circling the same problem. Every piece of evidence that clears Dexter depends on coincidence, disaster, or convenient death. Dokes dies in an explosion. Blood slides appear exactly where they would need to be to close the case. Leela's cabin fire erases the last remaining doubt. There is a thin line the series loves to trace: cop and killer, order and chaos, procedure and personal vendetta. Dexter walks it comfortably. He is the blood guy, who also spills blood. He investigates scenes he secretly created. He is both the one who bags the evidence and the one who makes sure there is none. LaGuerta is one of the only people who insists that the line matters, that crossing it has to mean something. She will risk her rank, her reputation, and, eventually, her life, rather than pretend that a charming analyst is exempt from consequence. Where others see a necessary evil, she sees a cop who has become the thing they are supposed to stop. And in that way, she becomes the conscience of the series. The quiet, relentless voice asking a question Dexter never wants answered: if we let this go, where does it end? The shipping container is one reply, but the real answer, the one that keeps echoing after LaGuerta falls, is still coming. The shipping container is one reply, but the real answer, the one that keeps echoing after LaGuerta falls, is still coming through a man Dexter has been waiting to kill his entire life. Hector Estrada is not just another name on Morgan's bloodslide collection. He is the man who helped butcher Dexter's mother in that first shipping container, the trauma that wrote the code into his nervous system. For Dexter, Estrada is the missing piece of an origin story, the last living link to the night that turned a frightened child into Miami's most meticulous predator. Killing him is not about cleaning up the streets. It is about closing a circle that has been open since season 1. LaGuerta understands enough of that history to see something else. If the Bay Harbor butcher is still out there, if Dokes really was a scapegoat, then Hector Estrada is the perfect pressure point. So she does something no one else in Miami Metro Homicide even thinks to do. She engineers a release. She quietly arranges for Estrada to be out on a supervised furlough, not because she cares about him, but because she suspects that the real butcher will. This is the story of a trap inside a trap. On the surface, Dexter believes he is running his own operation. He tails Estrada, studies his patterns, prepares the plastic and the knives, and the calm, rehearsed lines of judgment. Beneath that, LaGuerta is watching bank records, GPS pings, dock cameras. She positions surveillance around the marina, betting that a man obsessed with bodies in the ocean will come back to the water when an old ghost suddenly walks free. And then the timelines almost collide. Dexter lures Estrada to a remote area near the docks, ready to recreate the ritual that began his life. LaGuerta closes in on the same geography with officers, with eyes, with a working theory that the butcher is someone close, someone with access, someone like Morgan. We are going to watch these two operations move toward each other like trains on the same track. They miss by angles and seconds. A camera catches Dexter's car, but not his face. A patrol unit sweeps through just before he moves Estrada. LaGuerta arrives at a scene that still smells like plastic and bleach, but the table is gone. The victim vanished. The killer already improvising his exit route. You start to see how thin the line really is between exposure and escape. Every moment in this sequence is a near contact. A wrong turn by Estrada, a slightly slower response from Dexter, one more officer following LaGuerta's hunch, and the mask comes off in real time, not in theory. Instead, Dexter stays barely ahead by abandoning his perfect ritual and choosing chaos over closure. When you lay them all out together, these details do something important for LaGuerta. They prove her instincts are not the stubborn obsession of a political climber. They are the live, evolving observations of the only person treating Dexter like an active suspect. Settle in, get comfortable, because her next move will bring that suspicion even closer to his family. Her next move is to do something the series has taught you not to do. She remembers. For 6 seasons, every time Dexter Morgan brushes up against exposure, Miami Metro Homicide treats it like weather. A sudden storm, intense for a night, and then clear skies again. The missing blood slide, after the ice truck killer case. Dokes tailing Dexter to the marina, checking his rentals, watching the boat that just happens to be perfectly suited for late-night trips to the Gulf Stream. The Bay Harbor Butcher profile that might as well have had Dexter's employee photo stapled to it. Each one flares, then fades. We are going to walk back through some of those moments, but with LaGuerta standing over your shoulder. Think about the early seasons, Dexter losing his slide box, only for it to turn up in Dokes' car. At the time, it plays as a neat reversal. The dangerous cop gets framed, the friendly analyst goes home. Then, there is the algae evidence narrowing the butcher's dumping ground to Dexter's exact marina, and somehow, the case still lands on the most volatile man in the building, instead of the quiet technician who knows every inch of those currents. In the moment, the series invites you to breathe out. Problem solved. Status quo restored. The story can move on. But that is not the whole story. Because when you lay them all out together, you start to see how manufactured that sense of safety really is. The witness sketch in the ice truck killer investigation that could have drifted closer to Dexter's face. Deborah's dating profile that accidentally describes his inner life. Rita's ex, Paul, insisting Dexter framed him, and Rita literally holding the shoe that proves he is right. Each incident is treated as a self-contained spike of tension, resolved inside an episode or a season, then quietly filed away. LaGuerta refuses to file them away. Season 7 is what happens when one person in Miami Metro decides that patterns matter more than closure. She reopens the Bay Harbor Butcher case, finds a fresh blood slide that should not exist, and instead of accepting a copycat. She asks the question no one else wants. What if the original butcher never stopped? What if the evidence that cleared Dexter was the real anomaly? Settle in, get comfortable, because this is the story of those anomalies finally being treated like evidence. LaGuerta rewalks the docks, the cabins, the church, and the shipping containers with a prosecutor's eye. Who benefits? Who was there? Who always walks away clean? And once you start looking at every close call through that lens, Dexter's entire life at Miami Metro begins to tilt. The next step is simple and devastating. Let's follow her as she picks one of those forgotten moments and pulls on it to see what unravels first, the case, the department, or the Morgan family itself. She does not pull on that thread with a knife in her hand. She does it with a file folder, a chain of custody form, and a very boring meeting at Miami Metro Homicide. To see why that matters, we are going to put Dexter Morgan's famous code next to LaGuerta's morality and just sit with the difference. Harry gives Dexter a simple, almost elegant story. Kill only those who deserve it. Never get caught. Channel the darkness into something that looks, from a distance, like justice. It is a private religion of blood and plastic wrap, with 2 commandments and no appeals process. On paper, it sounds harsh. In practice, it is incredibly flattering. It tells Dexter that his urges are not a shameful defect, but a rare, almost useful asset, as long as he follows the rules. And it tells you, as a viewer, something equally comforting, that the monster we are watching is a necessary evil, a controlled burn in a corrupt city, a man whose violence is always pointed in the right direction. But that is not how the world actually works. When you lay them all out together, Harry's rules are less a moral system and more a permission slip. Dexter decides who deserves to die. Dexter decides when evidence is enough. Dexter decides that his need to kill outranks every other consideration, including the possibility of being wrong. There is no paperwork. There is no defense attorney. There is just a table. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and look at LaGuerta by contrast. Her world is subpoenas, warrants, surveillance logs, and the maddening slowness of due process. She has to convince a judge, a jury, internal affairs, and often her own detectives. She cannot simply know that Dexter is the Bay Harbor butcher. She has to prove it, step by step, in a system designed to doubt her at every turn. It would be so much easier for her to believe the noble serial killer fantasy. To decide that Dokes was dirty, that the case is closed, that the bodies in the bay are an unpleasant but convenient story that lets Miami sleep at night. Instead, she reopens the file, tracks shipping records, orders surveillance at the docks, and follows the evidence back to Dexter's boat and that burned church. This is the story of someone choosing the harder path. It is always simpler to step outside the system, declare yourself judge and executioner, and call that clarity. It is much harder to stay inside the flawed machinery of real justice, knowing it will let some monsters walk, because the alternative is letting one man's certainty replace the law. LaGuerta refuses that replacement. She is the only major character who never buys into the idea that Morgan's murders are anything but murders. No matter the target, no matter the backstory, she insists that bodies in plastic are not a loophole in the statute book. And that refusal is what makes her dangerous, not to Miami, but to Dexter's entire narrative about himself. And that refusal comes with a price. Because the moment LaGuerta stops treating Dexter Morgan as a quirky asset to Miami Metro Homicide and starts treating him as a suspect, every part of her life quietly shifts onto the chopping block. On paper, she is insulated. She is the captain, the politically savvy survivor, the person who knows which donors to charm and which reporters to call back. Her rank is supposed to be a shield. But reopening the Bay Harbor butcher case turns that shield into a target. She is not just questioning Dexter. She is questioning the task force, the FBI profile, the decision to pin everything on Dokes. She is, by implication, questioning her own department's competence. So the stakes stack up, one by one. Her rank is captain, because a politically inconvenient captain can be reassigned. Her credibility with subordinates, because every time she pulls Quinn or Batista into a side conversation about Morgan, she risks becoming the boss who has a vendetta. Her relationships with colleagues, especially Angel, because choosing the truth about Dexter means choosing against the comfortable fiction that let them all move on. Even her public image is on the line, since the Bay Harbor Butcher was sold to Miami as a closed triumph, a nightmare resolved. When you lay them all out together, you start to see how dangerous her curiosity really is. If she proves the butcher is still out there, she exposes years of departmental failure, political spin, and premature celebration. If she fails, she becomes the captain who smeared a dead sergeant, harassed a respected blood analyst, and wasted resources chasing ghosts. The series lets us feel that pressure. Her superior, Matthews, reminds her that the case is settled and that stirring it up could hurt careers, including hers. Colleagues warn her, gently at first, that going after Dexter looks personal. Even Deborah, once she realizes where LaGuerta is aiming, tries to nudge her off the trail with professional concern that is not entirely fake. The subtext in all of these moments is simple: back off, for your own good. But she does not. Instead, we are going to watch her trade safety for integrity in slow motion. She orders surveillance on Dexter's boat. She pulls old shipping records. She stands alone in that abandoned church, letting the pattern of blood and ash contradict the official story. Every decision is a small cut in her own security. This is the story of a gradual sacrifice, not a single grand gesture, but a series of choices where LaGuerta keeps placing truth above promotions, above friendships, above the comforting lie that Dokes was the monster and Dexter was just the man with the donuts. Settle in, get comfortable, because in the next moments, we will follow how that sacrifice narrows, step by step, into a fatal corner. And yet, even as LaGuerta is making that gradual sacrifice, most of us are not on her side. We are sitting with Dexter Morgan. We are inside his head. From the very first episode, the series invites you to hear his voiceover, to feel his anxiety when someone gets too close, to accept his code as a kind of dark, twisted ethics rather than what it actually is, a justification. This is the story of alignment, not with justice, but with a narrator. When you lay them all out together, every whispered confession, every wry inner comment as he walks through Miami Metro homicide, you start to see how thoroughly the series trains us to experience the world as Dexter experiences it. A routine audit feels like a threat. A questioning look from Dokes feels like harassment. And by the time LaGuerta quietly reopens the Bay Harbor Butcher file, the reflex is already built in. We feel hunted, because Dexter feels hunted. So when LaGuerta orders surveillance on the docks, when she pulls those old shipping records, when she finds that fresh blood slide and connects it back to the original pattern, the narrative framing is not, finally, someone is doing their job. It is, our protagonist is in danger. The tension is not, will justice be served? The tension is, will Morgan keep his mask on? That is where the audience's bias creeps in. LaGuerta becomes, for a lot of viewers, the meddling captain, the careerist, the power-hungry politician who will not let Dexter and Deborah live their lives. We are going to see comment threads calling her annoying, petty, obsessed, as if her insistence on revisiting Dokes' death is some personal vendetta instead of the only sane response to a case that never quite added up. But pause on that for a moment. Imagine every detail of her investigation is the same, except the character is a grizzled male detective. Same instincts, same refusal to drop the Bay Harbor Butcher, same willingness to risk his career to prove the friendly blood guy is actually a serial killer. Do we still roll our eyes at the obsessed cop, or do we start using words like brilliant, relentless, uncompromising? The discomfort around LaGuerta says something quiet about us, about how easily we accept Dexter's internal monologue as the moral weather report of the series, about how quickly we forgive the man with the knives and resent the woman with the case file. When she corners Deb at the gas station, when she confronts Dexter about the church, the unease many of us feel is not really about her behavior. It is about our complicity with his story. Because if LaGuerta is right, then every charming moment with Dexter at Miami Metro becomes something else entirely. And in the next section, we're going to watch what happens when her correctness stops being theoretical and starts closing in, one piece of evidence at a time. When LaGuerta's correctness stops being theoretical, it does not arrive in a dramatic rooftop confession or a last-minute chase through Miami traffic. It arrives in a file, then another, then a bloodslide in a plastic bag, logged, labeled, and quietly placed on her desk at Miami Metro Homicide. This is the story of a method. While other characters in the series follow their gut, chase their anger, or wait for a cinematic epiphany, LaGuerta does something far less glamorous. She goes back to work. She pulls the old Bay Harbor butcher binders, revisits reports that everyone else has already accepted as closed, and reads them like a person who refuses to be hypnotized by Dexter Morgan's mask. You start to see it in Season 7. She finds that fresh blood slide at a crime scene, and instead of treating it as a weird coincidence, she reanalyzes the forensics against the original pattern. Same size, same precision, same obsessive ritual. Where another cop might say, "That's strange," and move on, she cross-checks timelines, boat logs, and shipping records, quietly mapping Dexter's movements against the butcher's kills. Now, let's pause on that contrast. Doak's suspicion is visceral. He feels the violence humming under Dexter's skin. Deborah's realization is emotional. It explodes when her love for him collides with what she sees in that church. Even characters like Rita's ex-husband Paul are driven by personal grudges. They are not building cases. They are reacting to pain. LaGuerta, instead, builds something that can stand in court, not just in conversation. And that is exactly why she is so easy to ignore. Paperwork does not shout. A supplemental report does not kick down a door. When you lay them all out together, her steps look almost boring. Reopen the Bay Harbor butcher file, question the neatness of pinning everything on Doak's, retest evidence, pull surveillance footage of Dexter at the docks, connect him to the church, to the shipping container, to the places where bodies and lives end. But this is where the irony settles in, very quietly. The show trains us to lean forward during confrontations and to lean back during paperwork. Dexter in a kill room feels urgent. LaGuerta in an office, highlighting inconsistencies, feels like background. Yet, in any real version of Miami Metro Homicide, her version is what actual heroism looks like. Unglamorous, patient, and carried out by someone who is willing to be dismissed as obsessive rather than abandon the truth. Settle in, get comfortable, because we are going to mirror that same method here. This video is LaGuerta's approach applied to Dexter's entire run, a long, careful re-examination of a story we thought we already understood. And in the next section, we will follow where her files lead, into the institutional pressure, the personal risk, and the final, fatal line she refuses to step back from. Now, let's move backwards, into the soft focus of those early seasons, and look again at the moments that should have made Maria LaGuerta pause. Because when you lay them all out together, you start to see a different story forming in the background of Miami Metro Homicide. Think about Dexter Morgan at his first big crime scenes. The ice truck killer displays, the meticulously dismembered bodies. Everyone else is rattled, voices a little too loud, hands a little unsteady. Dexter is serene. He stands in the middle of horror with the relaxed posture of someone in his own living room, offering calm, almost poetic descriptions of blood spatter and dismemberment. On paper, that is expertise. from a step back, that is a man a little too at home with death. Or take his uncanny insight into killers. Again and again, Dexter just happens to intuit the psychology of whoever Miami is hunting. He guesses victim counts. He anticipates escalation. He suggests where a body might be dumped or what the next tableau will look like, and he is right with unnerving precision. In the fiction of the series, this is sold as brilliance. In the logic of a captain who has seen too much, it should read as something closer to confession. Then there's his proximity to key victims. Rita's abusive ex. The drug dealers and predators who somehow intersect with Dexter's personal orbit before they wind up dead. Deborah's boyfriends, her cases, her own near-death experiences that seem to trace an invisible line back to her brother. Every moment is isolated, plausible, explainable. But this is the story of a man whose life keeps brushing against the morgue drawers he later helps catalog. So why doesn't LaGuerta see it then? Part of the answer is structural. Her gaze is pulled outward, toward media pressure and mayor's office calls, toward clearance rates and budget meetings. She is managing internal rivalries, keeping Dokes from exploding, Masuka from offending a witness, Deborah from insubordination. The job keeps her looking at the board, not at the quiet analyst standing just off to the side of every board. We are going to imagine those same scenes from her perspective, if the noise had been turned down just a little. Dexter's odd calm becomes a red flag. His perfect theories stop feeling like luck and start feeling like lived experience. His constant presence at the edges of tragedy stops reading as dedication and starts reading as pattern. Because the information is always there, scattered across seasons like stray case notes in a cluttered file. The blood slide rituals, the boat at the marina, the way victims with no obvious connection keep dying in ways that make Dexter light up behind the eyes. It only takes one person willing to assemble it. And that is the quiet horror the series hides in plain sight, not just what Dexter does, but how long it takes for anyone, especially LaGuerta, to truly see him at all. So now we move into the middle stretch of the series, where Dexter Morgan's mask is more practiced, but the cracks are deeper, the patterns are established, the rituals are familiar. And yet the close calls start to feel less like coincidences and more like a file that someone could, at any time, decide to reopen. Season 4 gives us one of the most brazen examples. Dexter inserts himself into the Trinity investigation, shadowing Arthur Mitchell while officially consulting for Miami Metro homicide. He disappears from family events, shows up late to work with flimsy explanations, and just happens to be around when key breaks in the case occur. In the moment, his colleagues smooth it over as dedication, as the overinvestment of a blood spatter analyst who cares too much. But when you lay them all out together, the proximity is damning. LaGuerta, years later, would have seen a pattern of a civilian specialist who is always standing just off stage when monsters fall. We are going to linger for a second on the forensic oddities, the vacation murders where Dexter happens to be nearby, the bodies that present with unusually clean scenes, as if someone understood exactly what trace to remove. The way blood spatter reports sometimes steer the room away from suspects who resemble Dexter's targets and toward more convenient narratives. Each time, it is resolved by trust, by the assumption that Morgan is the one person in that building who could not possibly be manipulating the data. There is dry irony in how often luck and etiquette save him. A witness misremembers a face. A security camera is pointed 10 degrees off. A superior decides not to embarrass a respected analyst by double-checking his work. These are not grand conspiracies, just small acts of professional courtesy that over time become structural protection. You start to see how easily LaGuerta, with her reputation for being politically sharp rather than intuitively moral, could have walked back through these cases and found a different story written between the lines. The show knows what it is doing here. Every close call, every near miss, every time the mask almost comes off, is followed by a reset. Deb survives the shootout. The cabin burns. Evidence is misplaced, misfiled, or emotionally discarded. The tension spikes, and then the status quo reasserts itself, like a heartbeat returning to baseline. Until LaGuerta, in Season 7, refuses to let the line flatten. She takes those old anomalies and quietly begins to stack them against Dexter. As you settle in, get comfortable with that idea. Think about your own favorite almost caught moments from the middle seasons, the awkward interrogations, the near intersections at the docks, the times Dexter walks into the squad room just as his name is about to come up. Now imagine Maria LaGuerta, years later, watching the same footage, replaying the same conversations, and adding one more note to a growing, very dangerous file. This is the story of how those mid-series resets stop feeling safe once someone finally refuses to forget them. And once LaGuerta refuses to forget, the late seasons stop giving Dexter clean escapes and start giving him something much more dangerous. Time for his own control to unravel in front of her. We are going to sit in that space where his mistakes get bigger, just as her focus gets sharper. By the time we reach Season 7, Morgan is no longer the perfectly calibrated instrument we met walking into Miami Metro homicide with donuts and a spotless mask. He is a brother trying to protect Deb, a father trying to protect Harrison, a man trying to keep a relationship with Hannah alive. The kills get rushed. The cleanup gets messy. Travis Marshall's body on the church altar. The spontaneous decision to move it and burn the place. The half-thought-out dumping of evidence at the docks. Each choice leaves a wider trail than the one before. And LaGuerta is waiting on that trail. When she finds the fresh blood slide at the crime scene and quietly links it back to the Bay Harbor butcher pattern, you start to see how dangerous this overlap really is. Dexter's compulsion to commemorate his kills, the one ritual he never truly abandons, now exists on the exact timeline of her reopened investigation. Every new mistake is not just a risk in isolation, it is another data point in a file, with his name already penciled in the margins. His emotional entanglements make this worse. Deb walking in on him in the church forces a hasty cover story, then a hasty fire, then a season of improvisation instead of planning. Helping Hannah evade the law pulls him away from his usual routines and into spur-of-the-moment decisions about witnesses, poisons, and falsified evidence. The more he cares, the more human he becomes, and the more he behaves like any other suspect LaGuerta has ever broken in an interrogation room. Inconsistent, reactive, just slightly out of step with his own alibi. Watch how their paths cross at his weakest moments. LaGuerta questioning Dexter about the church while he is still replaying Deb's horrified expression. LaGuerta pulling security footage from the docks right after Dexter has dumped yet another body there, convinced the ocean will keep his secrets the way it always has. LaGuerta standing in Dokes' old cabin, seeing the ghosts Dexter thought were buried with the explosion, while he scrambles to redirect suspicion onto Estrada. Every close call, every near miss, every time the mask almost slips, she is a little closer than he realizes. When you lay them all out together, this late-game stretch feels like the most plausible ending point for the entire series. LaGuerta methodically connects the church, the docks, the shipping container, and finally walks into Miami Metro, ready to name Dexter Morgan as the Bay Harbor Butcher. The only reason that story does not end in an arrest is not because she is wrong, but because someone else makes one last, tragic choice. And that choice, more than any bloodslide or body bag, is what finally saves Dexter and destroys the real hero of this story. So when that choice in Miami Metro saves Dexter and destroys LaGuerta, it does not end the story. It simply pushes it somewhere quieter, darker, and more honest, a rusted shipping container at the docks, where every mask in this series first began to crack. To understand why that room matters, we are going to walk with LaGuerta as she gets there. It starts with Estrada. She pulls his old case files, sees his connection to Harry, to the shipping yard, to the very geography of Dexter Morgan's life. When Estrada suddenly reappears on parole, and then just as suddenly disappears again, she follows the paper trail of phone calls, GPS pings, and boat logs that all, improbably, keep bending back toward Dexter. On the surface, it looks procedural. A captain at Miami Metro Homicide, reviewing parole records, checking marina footage, questioning why Dexter is always one step to the side of major events. But when you lay them all out together, you start to see the shape she's tracing. The docks where the Bay Harbor butcher dumped bodies. The burned-out church where Travis Marshall died and Deb's career began to unravel. And now, the old shipping yard, where a man tied to Dexter's childhood keeps intersecting with Dexter's movements. The shipping container is not just another location. It is the place where young Dexter sat in blood, listening to his mother die. It is the architectural blueprint for his entire disposal ritual, the way he stacks bodies, wraps plastic, and slides them into the ocean. Every kill on his table is a distant echo of that first container. Every night run to the bay, a reenactment of that original crime scene. So when LaGuerta follows Estrada's trail into that maze of metal and salt air, the show is folding Dexter's story back on itself. Past and present, victim and killer, all converging in a single narrow corridor. The woman who has spent a decade believing in the system walks into the room that created the man who lives outside of it. Her mindset in those final steps is not triumphant. She is tired, politically isolated. She has been warned by colleagues, undermined by friends, quietly mocked for chasing a ghost everyone insists is dead. And yet, she keeps going, because this is the story of someone who trusts patterns more than popularity, evidence more than comfort. In her mind, this is the night she finally proves what no one wanted to hear about Dexter Morgan. She does not know it is the last place she will ever stand. We do, and that knowledge turns every footfall toward the container into a slow, suffocating countdown, setting the stage for the moment when justice and loyalty collide in a single gunshot. Now, let's step inside that container and watch how that collision actually plays out. Inside the container, the fantasy finally breaks. The kill room plastic is still up, Dexter Morgan is still in his apron, but there is no nighttime clarity here, no righteous calm. There is only LaGuerta, cuffed on the floor, and the sound of Deborah Morgan's footsteps as she walks into the place where every mask is about to come off at once. We are going to sit in that moment for a second, because when you lay them all out together, every suspicion, every near miss, every time LaGuerta was told to drop it, this is where they lead, to a woman who was right. Staring down a man everyone else chose to believe in. Deb looks from Dexter to LaGuerta, and you start to see the real triangle of the series. Not Dexter, Deb, and the code. Dexter, Deb, and the law. LaGuerta does not beg for her life in the way we might expect. Her first instinct is not survival. It is correction. She tells Deb, in essence, this is wrong. Dexter is the Bay Harbor butcher. You know it. You are a good cop. Do the right thing. Even bound, even terrified, she is still addressing Deb as Lieutenant Morgan, appealing to the part of her that took an oath in Miami Metro Homicide, not the part that grew up worshiping her brother. And notice what she asks for. She does not say, shoot him. She does not say, kill the monster. She says he needs to be arrested, brought in, exposed. She is arguing for due process, while literally lying on the floor of a vigilante's kill room. The plastic, the knives, the boat nearby, every detail is screaming that this is where people disappear. LaGuerta is the only one in the room still insisting that justice should be something other than another secret body in the bay. This is the story of her character distilled. Throughout the season, she risked her career, her reputation, her safety to reopen the Bay Harbor Butcher case. Here, in the container, stripped of rank and power, she keeps making the same choice. Law over loyalty. Procedure over personal fear. Truth over the very real possibility that Dexter will silence her forever. In a series where so many people bend the rules for Dexter, she is the rare figure who refuses to. When Deb hesitates, gun shaking between them, LaGuerta doubles down on that belief. She reminds Deb who she is supposed to be, the cop who earned her shield, the woman who knows the difference between right and wrong, even when it hurts. It is a plea, but it is also a judgment. If you shoot me, you cross a line you cannot uncross. And then, of course, someone does pull the trigger. But the most unsettling part is not who dies. It is what Deb chooses to kill in herself to make that shot, and what that says about the last person who ever truly tried to save her from Dexter. Settle in. Get comfortable. Because the fallout from that one decision does not end in the container, it ripples through every moment that follows. And the next time Dexter almost gets caught, LaGuerta's absence is going to matter even more. In the container, the air itself feels like it is choosing sides. Dexter on one end, LaGuerta on the other. And Deborah in the middle with a gun that will not stop shaking. Her eyes are wet, her breath is broken, and you can see the exact second when the badge on her chest and the brother she idolizes stop fitting inside the same life. This is not a clean standoff. The camera holds on Deb's hands, on the way the muzzle drifts between them, as if her body understands what her mind refuses to say out loud. If she shoots Dexter, she destroys the person who made her feel safe. If she shoots LaGuerta, she destroys the part of herself that still believes Miami Metro homicide is about justice instead of survival. Every moment stretches, every second asking her to decide which version of herself gets to keep existing. But the story has been nudging her for seasons. We are going to notice how the narrative weight leans. Dexter is the one we have followed into every dark room. He is the voice over, the explanation, the code. LaGuerta is framed as the obstacle, the careerist, the annoyance who will not let the Bay Harbor Butcher case stay buried. When you lay them all out together, the scenes have been training you to feel tension when LaGuerta gets close, and relief when Dexter wriggles free. So when Deb pulls the trigger, the series is not just resolving a triangle. It is rewarding loyalty to its protagonist over loyalty to the truth teller who is finally, undeniably right. This is the story of a show choosing its monster. LaGuerta's body falls, but what really dies is an entire worldview, the idea that facts, patterns, and persistence can still win in a place like this. That is why her death lands with such quiet tragedy, not because we lose a captain, but because the story itself rejects her insistence that there is a line you do not cross, even for family. From that shot onward, the code is no longer something Dexter struggles to uphold. It becomes something Deb has to violate just to stay beside him. And it does not leave her. The next season, Deb is hollowed out, self-destructive, replaying that container in every choice she makes. You start to see that LaGuerta was not just an external antagonist. She was the last living piece of Deb that believed in right and wrong as fixed points instead of negotiable feelings. Now, let's pause on that for a moment. Because once that piece is gone, the series enters a kind of moral freefall. The one person at Miami Metro who refused to compromise is removed, and what follows is a world where the mask can slip, the bodies can pile up. And there is no longer anyone inside the story with both the will and the institutional power to say, this has to stop. Settle in, get comfortable, because the next time Dexter almost gets caught, we are going to feel the exact shape of the hole LaGuerta leaves behind. Her death is officially neat in a way that nothing about it actually is. On paper, Miami Metro closes the file with a story that is almost comfortingly simple. LaGuerta was obsessed with clearing dokes. She pushed too hard on the Bay Harbor butcher case, and she walked into a trap set by a man she had wrongly suspected for years. A tragic miscalculation, a cop who could not let go. But that is not the whole story, because the official version has to erase the most dangerous detail of all, that she died in the same shipping container where Dexter Morgan and Deborah Morgan were standing with a gun between them. The report folds the night into foggy timelines, ambiguous ballistics, and the idea that LaGuerta and Estrada killed each other, papering over the reality that a captain of Miami Metro homicide was executed for being right. When you lay them all out together, the ripples start with Deb. There is no sense of victory in that container, only the sound of her choosing. She pulls the trigger on LaGuerta, but what she really kills is her own idea of herself as a cop, a sister. A person who could still believe in any kind of line between right and wrong. In the aftermath, we are going to watch her unravel in slow motion. The pills, the drinking, the way she flinches around the word hero as if it were physically sharp. Every moment after that night, Deb's guilt sits in the room like a third person. She cannot celebrate Dexter's survival because it is built on the body of the only superior who ever tried to save her from the truth about him. The irony is quiet and brutal. Deb once begged Dexter to stop killing. Now she is killed to keep him killing. Dexter's world, meanwhile, becomes strangely hollow. For 7 seasons, LaGuerta's suspicion has been a kind of invisible architecture around him. Even when she is not on screen, she is the one person inside the story still willing to say, what if the monster is ours? Once she is gone, the mask has less resistance to push against. There are fewer close calls, fewer scenes where Dexter has to outthink a real investigator instead of just lying to people who want to believe him. You start to see how brittle that makes the series. Without LaGuerta's pursuit forcing Morgan to confront himself as the Bay Harbor butcher, the killings feel less like a dangerous balance and more like inertia. The tone shifts. A line has been crossed that cannot be uncrossed, and from that point on, every kill is happening in a world where we know a good woman died trying to stop him and failed. Her absence is loudest in the quiet scenes. Briefings where no one questions the convenient suspect, hallway conversations where no one remembers dokes, strategy meetings where no one says Dexter's name with that carefully measured doubt. This is the story of a department that loses its conscience and keeps working anyway. Now, let's follow what happens the next time Dexter almost gets caught, when there is no LaGuerta left to say out loud what everyone else is trying not to think. When LaGuerta is gone, Miami Metro homicide keeps moving as if a piece of its spine has been quietly removed. Cases come in, briefings happen, Dexter Morgan stands at the projector and walks everyone through blood spatter like nothing fundamental has changed. The department remembers her, but it is a very particular kind of memory. We are going to look at how the series itself teaches you to think about her once she is no longer in the room to argue back. You get the framed photo, the black ribbon, the somber words about fallen captain who gave everything to the job. Batista names a plaza after her. He gives speeches about her dedication, and the camera lingers on the memorial, as if to say, "This is closure." This is the story of how institutions grieve. But listen to the way they talk about what she actually did. LaGuerta becomes tenacious, political, relentless, in a vague, sanded-down way. The specifics of that last season, of her insisting that Dokes was innocent and that the Bay Harbor butcher was still out there, are rarely named. It is safer to remember her as an ambitious captain than as the one person who said, out loud, that Dexter Morgan might be a serial killer. You start to see the gaps when you lay them all out together. Batista will bring her up as inspiration to keep fighting the good fight, but he never truly revisits the content of her suspicions. Quinn, who watched her reopen the case and chase a bloodslide nobody could explain, shrugs toward the official narrative. Even Matthews, who once tried to rein her in, is more comfortable with a heroic portrait on the wall than with the uncomfortable possibility that she died because she was right. Very few people in this world ever sit with that possibility. It would mean admitting that Miami Metro not only failed to catch the Bay Harbor butcher, it protected him, promoted him, and let him process their crime scenes. It is easier for everyone who survives to believe that LaGuerta went too far, pushed too hard, and paid the price for her own obsession. There are flickers of something else. Deb has those quiet, trembling moments where LaGuerta's name hangs in the air like a verdict. In therapy, in arguments with Dexter, you can feel her circling the truth that the woman she shot on that concrete floor was not a villain, but the only honest cop left. And then she pulls back, buries it under guilt, addiction, and the more manageable story that she is simply broken. That selective remembrance feels uncomfortably familiar. Real departments hold ceremonies, retire badges, and hang plaques, all while ignoring the policy memos and whistleblower reports that person died trying to push through. The show mirrors that pattern so closely that it almost stops feeling like fiction. So LaGuerta's real legacy is not in the speeches or the plaza or the photo. It lives in the questions that never quite go away, in the way every new Bay Harbor-style case carries a faint echo of her voice, asking whether the monster was always closer than anyone wanted to believe. And the next time Dexter almost gets caught, with no LaGuerta to name what she sees, those unanswered questions are going to matter more than any memorial ever could. Those unanswered questions become the quiet hum under Dexter New Blood. We leave Miami, we leave Metro, we leave the familiar fluorescent glow of the homicide bullpen, and we find Dexter Morgan in the snow, calling himself Jim Lindsay, pretending the story is over. On the surface, it almost works. He lives in Iron Lake, a small town where everyone knows everyone, and he has built a new mask that looks a lot like peace. He sells hunting gear, flirts with the chief of police, keeps his cabin neat and his routine predictable. And every single night, he goes home and does nothing. No slides, no kills, no blood. For nearly a decade, the dark passenger is caged, and the line between who he is and who he was seems, for once, to hold. But that is not the whole story, because the moment Harrison arrives, the old habits start to flicker back to life. A local killer, a rich, untouchable man, starts to look a little too much like the people Dexter used to put on his table. One slip in the snow, one impulsive murder, and we are going to watch the entire fragile structure of Jim Lindsay collapse. Not immediately. Slowly, almost politely, as if fate has decided it is time. What you start to see, though, is what happens when there is no LaGuerta in the room. There is no seasoned investigator who remembers Bay Harbor. No one at Iron Lake PD who has spent years side-eyeing Dexter's perfect lab reports. No institutional memory of a blood analyst in Miami who left a trail of bodies in the ocean. His history is a ghost that only the audience and a few archival headlines can see. Angela Bishop steps into that vacuum. She is the closest thing the revival has to a LaGuerta figure, the local chief. A woman who cares about victims, who is willing to look past what she wants to be true and follow evidence instead. She connects the missing girls. She digs into the old Bay Harbor butcher case. She notices that Jim Lindsay's past does not quite add up. But she has no years of friction with Dexter, no professional rivalry, no long, bitter memory of Dokes dying for a crime he did not commit. So the texture of the hunt changes. In Miami, LaGuerta's pursuit feels like the culmination of a decade of tiny doubts, political compromises, and quiet file pulling in dark offices. In Iron Lake, Dexter's exposure feels more like a convergence of accidents, a son returning, a careless kill, an old case file on the internet. When you lay them all out together, you start to see how much weight LaGuerta's slow, methodical pressure added to every moment Dexter almost got caught. New blood accidentally proves her importance by subtraction. Take away the woman who would not let it go, and the fall of Dexter Morgan feels less like a system finally correcting itself, and more like narrative gravity finally kicking in. The question is what happens when that missing pressure, all those years of groundwork, finally catch up with him in one small-town jail cell, and that is where the story widens out. Because what happens to Dexter Morgan inside Miami Metro Homicide is not just a quirk of this one department, it is a pattern you recognize the moment you start thinking about real institutions, real workplaces, real people who were protected long after the danger was obvious. When you lay them all out together, the excuses sound eerily familiar. Dexter is competent. Dexter is kind. Dexter is part of the family. The same way churches shield abusive clergy, corporations circle around a charismatic executive, or universities quietly move a predatory professor. Miami Metro keeps choosing the comfort of the insider over the discomfort of the truth. The system is not blind by accident. It is blind on purpose, because seeing clearly would mean tearing up the ground it stands on. Charm, competence, and time served become a kind of armor. Dexter brings donuts, cracks dry jokes, solves impossible cases. He is the man you want on your crime scene, the reassuring presence in every briefing, the one whose blood reports close cases and make everyone look good. Over the years, that reliability hardens into something dangerous, an assumption that he cannot be the problem, so the problem must be somewhere else. The mask becomes self-reinforcing. The more he helps them, the less they are willing to see him. And this is where LaGuerta is quietly radical. She has all the same pressures, all the same incentives to look away. Her reputation is on the line, her political capital, her friendships with people like Batista, her already fragile standing after the Bay Harbor butcher scandal. It would be so much easier to let the memorial plaques stay where they are and accept that Dokes was the monster. Instead, she chooses the harder story. She refuses to be lulled by familiarity, even when it isolates her, even when it makes her the unwelcome voice in every room. Pattern interrupt for a second. Think about how the show frames that choice. The camera stays close on Dexter, on Deb, on their panic and their fear of being exposed. LaGuerta is often pushed to the edge of the frame, talked about as an obstacle, a careerist, an annoyance who won't let it go. But the text of the series keeps slipping in another reading. She is the only one who treats the evidence the same, whether it points at a stranger or at the beloved analyst who has been there since season 1. So we are going to sit with the uncomfortable part. This is the story of a department that mostly protects its own, and of one woman who refuses to participate in that protection. The show uses her to ask a quiet, unsettling question. Who do you trust, and why? Do you trust the person who feels safe, or the person who makes you uneasy by insisting on the facts? Now, let's turn that back on us for a moment. Somewhere in your own life, there is probably a LaGuerta figure, the coworker who keeps raising the same concern in meetings, the friend who will not laugh off the red flags around someone everyone else adores, the relative who remembers the thing everyone else has agreed to forget. It is tempting to tune them out, to defend the familiar face, to protect the person whose presence makes your world feel stable. Settle in. Get comfortable with the idea that Dexter's world is not unique. You start to see that the real tension in this series is not just whether Morgan will be caught, but whether anyone around him will value truth over comfort long enough to do what LaGuerta tries to do. And once you see that, the next time she walks into a scene, you are watching something more than office politics. You are watching the only person in Miami Metro who is willing to lose everything rather than keep pretending she does not know what she knows. So now, instead of watching Dexter Morgan glide through Miami Metro homicide like the center of the universe, we are going to quietly move the camera 6 feet to the left. Settle in, get comfortable, and imagine the same fluorescent hallways, the same crime scenes, the same donuts on the table, but the voice you hear over them is not Dexter's. It is Maria LaGuerta's. In this version, the inner monologue you follow is not about a code or a hunger. It is about doubt. Policy, memory, you hear her think about Dokes when everyone else has decided to forget him. You hear her notice that the Bay Harbor Butcher profile points to someone inside the building, and feel that small, unwelcome click when her eyes land on Morgan's boat registration, on his perfect punctuality, on how every body in the bay seems to orbit his life just a little too closely. Familiar scenes start to tilt. The morning where Dexter strolls in, calm and helpful, offering to run blood work as a favor, stops feeling like kindness and starts feeling like control. His easy smile at the briefing becomes eerie, because now you are watching it through a woman who has spent decades reading politicians and suspects and knows exactly what a mask looks like. When you lay them all out together, the little jokes, the convenient expertise, the way he is always there but never really there, you start to see strategy where the original series asked you to see charm. And because this is the story of LaGuerta, her personal life does not sit on the edge of the frame. It moves to the center. Her ambitions are no longer framed as vanity. They are the fuel that keeps her pushing when reopening the Butcher case makes her look obsessed. Her fear is not an occasional reaction shot. It becomes the tension line of the season, as she realizes that if she is right, she has been sleeping, working, and joking next to a serial killer for years. That is the horror of her position. She cannot go home and confess it to anyone. She cannot accuse Dexter without proof. She has to order surveillance on a man who brings birthday cakes to the office. She has to stand in a burned church and think, quietly, that the only person who could have cleaned this scene that well is the analyst she just hugged in the hallway. In that version of the story, the shipping container at the docks does not play as a sudden twist. It feels like the inevitable endpoint of a long, lonely pursuit of the truth, the place every late-night file review and every ignored warning sign has been leading her toward. And once you watch that container through her eyes, the question stops being how Dexter keeps getting away with it, and becomes whether anyone will ever be allowed to walk out of there with the truth and survive it. If the shipping container is where the truth finally crystallizes, it is also where the fantasy of Dexter as a necessary evil comes apart. Because that fantasy is powerful. It is the quiet promise the series makes to you in almost every season. Here is a killer who only targets bad people, who cleans up what Miami Metro homicide cannot or will not solve, who turns the horror of murder into something strangely comforting. It is the fantasy of efficiency. No appeals, no mistrials, no paperwork. A neat plastic wrapped table instead of a drawn-out trial. We are going to watch Morgan stalk rapists, traffickers, corrupt killers in uniform, and we are invited to feel like the world is slightly more balanced afterward. When you lay them all out together, every carefully chosen victim, every meticulous ritual, you start to see how the show lets you file Dexter under necessary maintenance rather than ongoing catastrophe. That appeal is not abstract. It feeds on real frustration. Cases mishandled, evidence lost, suspects walking on technicalities. We live in a world where bureaucracy fails people, where victims are disbelieved, where power protects itself. So when Dexter does what the system cannot, there is a part of you that exhales. Finally, someone is doing something. The mask of the avenging angel slips easily over the face of a serial killer when the alternative is more headlines about injustice. LaGuerta's insistence on due process is designed to puncture that comfort. She is the one who keeps saying, "It matters how we get there." When she reopens the Bay Harbor butcher case, she is not just defending Dokes' name, she is defending the idea that evidence, procedure, and accountability are the only things standing between justice and sanctioned slaughter. Every time she pushes back against Dexter's tidy narrative, the series quietly reminds you that unchecked killing is still a horror, even when the targets look guilty on paper. And her presence forces you to look at the collateral damage. Dokes, framed and burned. Estrada, dragged back into Dexter's orbit so Deb can stage a rescue. The boatyard suspect LaGuerta tails, only to realize too late that the real danger is the man her department trusts. Innocent people do not just die on Dexter's table, they die around it, because of the lies required to keep that table operating. Calling Dexter necessary is part of the story he tells himself, and part of the story the series tempts you to accept. It is the story that justifies silencing people like LaGuerta, people who insist that no one is above the rules, not even the charming blood guy who makes the bodies disappear. Now, let's sit with what happens once that story starts to crack, and someone else decides they are willing to become necessary too. Once that story starts to crack, you start to see something else, a pattern that has been there from the very first season, quietly repeating underneath every dramatic reveal. Every close call, every near miss, every moment the mask almost slipped, follows the same basic rhythm. Dexter gets overconfident. He lets an emotion leak into a crime scene. And then, some tiny forensic detail, some stray fiber or slide or footprint, raises its hand and refuses to disappear. We are going to trace that rhythm, not through every case file, but through what they all share. Dexter Morgan is meticulous, but he is never perfect. A drop of blood on his shoe when he frames Paul. The way he lingers just a little too long at the crime scene of a killer he plans to take. The fresh blood slide LaGuerta finds at the docks years after the Bay Harbor butcher case is closed. These are not grand mistakes. They are hairline fractures. On their own, each one is survivable. Someone shrugs. Someone changes the subject. Someone who loves him chooses to believe the version of Dexter that brings donuts to Miami Metro homicide instead of the version who owns a boat and knows exactly how long it takes a body to sink. His survival depends as much on that shared denial as on his own skill. The dark passenger is dangerous, but the collective decision not to look too closely is what keeps him safe. This is where LaGuerta becomes more than just an obstacle. Because when you lay them all out together, you realize she is the only major character who consistently refuses to treat these anomalies as coincidences. The algae that points back to the same marina, the profile that describes a forensically trained insider, the uncanny return of the blood slide signature. Where others see bad luck or office politics, she sees a line of breadcrumbs. There is a thin line between exposure and safety, and Dexter walks it for years without fully appreciating how thin it is. He tells himself his code protects him. He tells himself his planning is airtight. But each season, that line narrows. Dokes watching his movements, Rita noticing his absences, Debra standing in the church as he kills Travis. The pattern is not that Dexter is untouchable. The pattern is that people keep stepping back from the edge just before they name what he is. Now, let's add the pattern interrupt the series itself keeps throwing at you. The real suspense is not whether Dexter will be caught, but how long someone like LaGuerta can keep pushing before the system pushes back. How long can one person insist that the evidence means what it obviously means, in a world built to protect the illusion of the harmless analyst? Settle in, get comfortable, because the next part of this story is what happens when she finally refuses to step back. When you lay them all out together, every moment where LaGuerta refuses to drop the Bay Harbor butcher, you start to see that this is not just stubbornness. It is biography. It is survival. It is a lifetime of understanding that if she lets go of the truth, the institution she fought to belong to will gladly let go of her. LaGuerta is a woman of color who climbed to captain in Miami Metro Homicide, a building full of men who underestimate her until they need a promotion signed. By the time we meet her, she has already learned that she has to be twice as competent, twice as prepared, and twice as careful just to stand in the same room. Every case is a test she cannot afford to fail. So when the Bay Harbor butcher case never quite fits, when Dokes' death never fully settles, she cannot treat that as a harmless loose end. For her, loose ends are how people like her get blamed. And then there's Dokes. The series frames their relationship as prickly, political, sometimes self-serving on her part. But under that, there is a very simple loyalty. She knew him as a flawed, abrasive, deeply principled cop. She knew how he looked at Dexter Morgan. When the blood slides surface in his car and the case wraps too cleanly, LaGuerta feels what Dokes felt. The wrong person has been fed to the machine. Clearing his name is not abstract justice. It is a personal debt. Her ambition and pride are easy to read as villainous, the ambitious boss, the political climber. But that same ambition is what lets her stand in a room of colleagues, superiors, and old allies and say calmly that they are wrong. It is what lets her reopen a closed investigation, order surveillance on a beloved analyst, and risk being laughed out of the department. Pride is the armor that keeps her walking back into meetings where everyone wants her to shut up and move on. Beneath all of that, she still believes in the system, not as something pure, but as something salvageable. She believes that if you keep pushing, evidence can outweigh popularity, that the process can correct its own mistakes. Where Dexter uses the system as a mask, she treats it as a promise that can be forced to keep itself honest. That is why she goes back to the slides, the marina, the church, the shipping container. Procedure is her weapon. When you combine that personal loyalty to Dokes, that professional drive to be unimpeachably right, and that moral conviction that the institution can be better, you get someone uniquely suited to see through Dexter's harmless act. Everyone else at Miami Metro knows Morgan as the donut guy, the blood guy, the quiet friend. LaGuerta knows what it costs to be wrong. And in the next part of this story, we are going to watch how that knowledge pulls her, step by step, to the exact place Dexter never wanted anyone to stand. And once you see LaGuerta standing in that place, you start to see everyone else in the series a little differently. Because almost every major character in Dexter's life gets close to that same spot. They feel the wrongness, they brush against the truth, and then they look away. Think about Dokes. He is the first one at Miami Metro Homicide to really clock that there is something predatory about Dexter Morgan. He tails him, checks his rental cars, follows the boat, corners him in quiet hallways. Dokes is willing to say out loud what no one else will, but even he is limited by the story he can live with. He thinks Dexter is dirty, a murderer, maybe connected to cartels or gangs. The idea that the smiling blood guy is a meticulous serial killer of other killers is almost too baroque, even for him. And when Dexter frames him as the Bay Harbor Butcher, the institution rushes to accept it. Dokes dies in that cabin, Leela lights the match, and everyone breathes a little easier. It fits. The angry cop with a temper problem was the monster. Case closed. Dokes never gets the time, or the distance, to put the whole pattern together. Lundy comes closer in a different way. The Bay Harbor profile he builds is unnervingly accurate. A forensically skilled insider, comfortable on the water, moving bodies from Miami's edges out into the current. Every line of that description brushes against Dexter's mask without quite tearing it. But Lundy is an outsider, a visitor. His job is to close a file, not to dismantle a life he sees every morning in the lab. When the slides appear in Dokes' car, when the cabin explodes, he lets the evidence tell him a simpler story than the one his instincts were circling. Deborah is the most painful version of this. Across season after season, she feels it. The way Dexter shows up just a little too fast. The way his advice nudges cases in oddly convenient directions. She even builds a profile of the ice truck killer that practically describes Morgan himself. But love is its own kind of blindfold. When you lay them all out together, every moment of suspicion, every near confession, you are watching someone choose her brother over her own perception of reality. Fear, love, career anxiety, simple exhaustion, they all work the same way. They give people permission to stop asking the question that keeps them up at night. Maybe the nice coworker is just quirky. Maybe the coincidence is just coincidence. It is easier to be tired than to be terrified. LaGuerta feels all of those pressures. She has politics to manage, a reputation scarred by her defense of Dokes, friendships with Batista and the rest of the squad, and a very real awareness that accusing Dexter Morgan means reopening the ugliest chapter of Miami Metro homicide. But she does something different. She does not let the discomfort close the file. This is the story of someone who is not necessarily smarter than Dokes, or more experienced than Lundy, or closer than Deb. She is simply more willing to live with uncomfortable knowledge. When a fresh blood slide appears years later, when shipping records and doc footage and that burned cabin refuse to sit quietly in the past, LaGuerta lets the dread in. She chooses to keep looking when everyone else has decided they have seen enough. And as we move into her final investigation, we're going to watch what it costs a person to keep their eyes open in a world that keeps rewarding people for looking away. So, when we talk about the real hero of Dexter, we're going to have to look away from the man the series is named after and turn toward the woman the camera often treats as an obstacle. When you lay them all out together, her decisions, her risks, her final choice in that shipping container, you start to see that Maria LaGuerta is the only person in Miami Metro homicide who consistently chooses justice over comfort. This is the story of someone who remembers. She reopens the Bay Harbor Butcher case years after everyone else has filed it away. Because the neat solution with Dokes never really made sense, She notices the fresh blood slide at the new crime scene and quietly links it back to the old pattern. She pulls shipping records, dock footage, and forensics, and they do not point at a convenient scapegoat. They point again and again at Dexter Morgan. And she keeps going. LaGuerta orders surveillance on Dexter, tracks his movements to the docks, connects him to the church where Travis Marshall died, and walks herself straight into the geography of his secret life. Every step is a professional risk. Each file she reopens, each colleague she pressures, is another way of saying, my career, my reputation, even my safety, are worth less than the truth about the Bay Harbor butcher. Now, set that beside Dexter's arc. For all the talk about his code, his story, his need to channel the monster, what we actually watch, season after season, is self-preservation. He frames Dokes. He lets Leela die with the blame. He is willing to let Hannah walk away from multiple murders because she understands him. When Deborah learns the truth, he pulls her into the lie, and when LaGuerta gets too close, he is willing to let his sister kill an innocent woman to keep his mask in place. Heroism in this world is not about who we like more. It is not about narrative focus or which voiceover we hear. It is about who, when pressed, chooses the harder thing. LaGuerta could have looked away, like Batista, like Masuka, like almost everyone else who felt that something was off and decided their peaceful life mattered more. Instead, she walks into that shipping container, unarmed except for a badge and the belief that the system she serves is still worth serving. She is not perfect. The series shows us her political maneuvering, her ambition, her willingness to play the promotion game. But those flaws make her more human, not less heroic. Because when the line finally appears between protecting her own position and exposing the truth about Morgan, she steps across it, knowing exactly what it might cost. In a story built around a charismatic monster, LaGuerta is the rare character who refuses to be charmed into silence. And as we watch the final moments of her investigation, settle in, get comfortable, because the next choice someone makes in that container will tell us exactly what this series thinks justice is worth. So, if we stay in that shipping container for a moment, with LaGuerta staring down the barrel of someone else's story about justice, there is an invitation hidden in that silence. The invitation is to go back, to walk through this entire series again, but this time, to let Maria LaGuerta be the one we are following through Miami Metro Homicide. On a rewatch, we are going to slow everything down around her. Every scene she's in, every raised eyebrow in a briefing, every time she glances at Dexter Morgan a fraction too long. You start to see that the show has been quietly giving her a parallel investigation all along, written not in big speeches, but in small investigative moves, half-finished thoughts, and the way she never quite lets the Bay Harbor butcher file close in her mind. When you lay them all out together, those moments stop feeling like background noise. Track every time she's right, every time she notices a detail at a crime scene that points toward an insider, every time she questions the open and shut narrative around Dokes. Then, next to that, notice every time she is dismissed, sidelined, or gently steered back toward politics, promotions, and appearances instead of the truth that is standing in her own bullpen. And then there are the near misses. If you watch with LaGuerta in focus, you can mark every moment Dexter almost slips because of her. The fresh blood slide she finds that mirrors the original Bay Harbor pattern. The surveillance she orders at the docks that brushes against Dexter's boat. The way she connects him to the church, to the shipping records, to the places where his mask should have cracked wide open. Each time, Morgan survives by inches, and each time, her picture of him gets a little sharper. One way to really feel this is to treat certain stretches of the series as a self-contained LaGuerta story. Take the Bay Harbor Butcher arc, Season 7, and the path into that final shipping container, and watch them almost as their own limited series about a captain who refuses to let a dead colleague be framed as a monster. This is the story of a woman reopening an old wound, following the evidence, and walking straight into the dark because no one else will. Something strange happens when you watch Dexter this way. The familiar comfort of the show, the rhythm of Case of the Week and nighttime rituals, slows down and becomes quieter, more haunting, almost meditative. It becomes less about how cleverly Morgan avoids being caught and more about how long a system can ignore the one person who keeps seeing through him. And somewhere in that tension is the reminder that stories like Dexter can be both soothing and unsettling at the same time. If we let characters like LaGuerta hold our attention, if we follow every line she pulls on, the series doesn't just help us fall asleep, it also asks us what it costs to keep looking away. Now, let's follow that thread one step further into what LaGuerta's death really says about the kind of justice this world is willing to live with. So now, we are going to let the heat of all of that slowly cool down. When you lay them all out together, every suspicion, every file she reopened, every late night drive down to the docks, you start to see a single steady line running through the chaos of this series. It begins back with the Bay Harbor Butcher case, with LaGuerta standing almost alone in Miami Metro homicide, saying that James Dokes does not fit the pattern, that the evidence against him is too neat, too convenient, too perfectly pointed away from Dexter Morgan. And it ends in that quiet, echoing shipping container, with LaGuerta on the floor, still insisting that what is right is more important than who we love. This is the story of someone who simply refused to look away. From the moment she noticed that fresh bloodslide turn up years after the Butcher case was supposed to be closed, to the way she traced marina records and security footage and old crime scene photos, there is a rhythm to her attention. Every close call, every near miss, every time Dexter's mask slipped for just a second, you can find LaGuerta somewhere nearby, watching, filing it away, letting the pattern build instead of talking herself out of it, the way almost everyone else does. As we drift toward sleep, the sharp details can start to soften. The exact season numbers, the precise order of the clues, the specific argument in the Christmas party scene where she confronts Dexter and Deb, those can blur at the edges a little. What stays clear is the feeling of her presence. The captain who keeps walking back into rooms other people have already left, who keeps reopening boxes everyone else has taped shut. While Dexter moves through Miami as both friendly analyst and hidden predator, she is one of the only people who treats that thin line between normalcy and horror as something fragile, something that can break without warning. Because this world makes it very easy for a killer to hide in plain sight. All it takes is a pleasant smile, a helpful report, a story that explains away the strange moment you just saw. Without someone like LaGuerta, every institution, every friendship in this series leans toward comfort instead of truth, toward loyalty instead of justice. When she dies in that container, it is not just a body on the floor. It is the quiet removal of the one person who insisted that the evidence mattered more than the narrative everyone preferred. So settle in, get comfortable, and let the specifics fade just a bit. Let's keep instead the slow, determined way she kept pulling on threads, even when it cost her everything. As you breathe a little deeper, you can imagine the noise of Miami Metro dimming, the case files closing, and LaGuerta's questions still hanging gently in the air, guiding us into a softer, more reflective dark. So before we move on, we're going to do something the show itself never really pauses to do. We're going to say a quiet thank you. Not to Dexter, not to Morgan the Myth, but to the woman who kept insisting that the story did not add up, no matter how much everyone wanted it to. Maria LaGuerta, you were the one person in Miami Metro homicide who refused the easy version. When the Bay Harbor butcher case wrapped itself up in a neat bow with Dokes as the monster, you did not celebrate. You noticed the seams. You remembered the man you had worked with, the details that did not match, the way those blood slides felt too deliberate, too perfectly incriminating. You carried that discomfort for years, long after the rest of the building had moved on. When you lay them all out together, every moment you pushed back looks almost reckless. Reopening a closed case, ordering surveillance on a respected colleague, standing in front of Quinn and Matthews and essentially saying, "No, this is wrong." But underneath the politics and the ego and the ambition, there is something very simple. You kept choosing justice over loyalty, truth over comfort, even when it isolated you, and the story punishes you for it. That shipping container in Season 7 is not just a crime scene, it is a warning. LaGuerta dies because she will not let Dexter's mask stay in place. She walks in there, unarmed in the ways that matter, trusting that the system and Deborah and the years of shared history will protect her from the beloved monster she is finally naming. They do not. Her body on that cold floor is the cost of being right too soon and too insistently in a world that prefers its killers charming. But that is not the whole story. Because the text of her actions, the quiet, methodical way she tracks Morgan to the docks, to the church, to the anniversary of Dokes' death, marks her as the real hero of this series. She is the only one who looks at the pattern, at the algae, at the bloodslide that should not exist, and says, out loud, "This is him." She does what every detective in a story like this is supposed to do, and she pays the price that real whistleblowers often pay. So let's let the narrative voice soften for a moment. You can imagine her walking those halls of Miami Metro one last time, files tucked under her arm, heels clicking on the tile, eyes already on the next inconsistency. As you settle in, get comfortable again, you start to see that her legacy is not just suspicion, but permission to ask one more question, to tug one more thread, to carry a little of that stubborn insistence on truth into your own life, in small, humane ways. And as we follow Dexter forward into the later seasons and the new blood of Iron Lake, we will keep her with us, a quiet conscience in the background, reminding us what it really looks like when someone refuses to look away. So if you are still here with us, still awake, still following the quiet thread of LaGuerta's shadow through Dexter's world, settle in, get comfortable. Some people have probably drifted off by now, breathing slow and even, somewhere back in Miami Metro homicide, with the hum of fluorescent lights in their dreams. But you are here, at this later hour of the story, and that tells us something about the way you watch this series. There is a different kind of attention that shows up this late. You are not just waiting for the next kill or the next twist. You are tracing every small decision, every sideways glance, every time someone like LaGuerta refuses to let the mask stay in place. And if you find yourself wanting more of this slower, more deliberate way of looking at Dexter Morgan and the people around him, we are going to gently invite you to stay connected. No rush, no pressure. Just when you lay them all out together in your mind, these long, reflective nights with the show, you start to see that subscribing is less about chasing updates and more about building a place where this kind of patient storytelling can exist on a platform that usually moves much faster than this. If you want to, you can tap subscribe so that the next time we sink back into a series like this, you are already in the room when it begins. And if you are still awake enough to move a finger or two, you might leave a comment, quietly, the way LaGuerta quietly reopened the Bay Harbor butcher file. Tell us the first moment you realized she might be right about Dexter, or the close call that still lingers for you. Maybe it was the blood slide she found that should not have existed, or the way she stood alone in that shipping container, refusing to rewrite the truth. Those are the moments that tell us how you read the story. Supporting the channel, even in small ways, helps keep this style alive, long, careful walks through a series, where we follow the line from the first suspicion to the final consequence. On a fast-paced platform, this is the story of making room for slow suspicion, for moral ambiguity, for characters like LaGuerta, who do not fit neatly into fan favorites but quietly hold the spine of the narrative. Because she is not the only one. In future videos, we are going to come back to other side characters who might secretly be the moral center of their worlds, the ones the camera glances past while the real story gathers around them. And there is one in particular, standing just off to the side of Dexter's brightest scenes, who changes everything once you finally look straight at them. So now, as we ease away from the bright glare of Dexter Morgan's worst secrets, we can let the frame widen again. Back out over Miami at night, the causeways thinning into lines of light, the glass towers of downtown dimming one window at a time, until even Miami Metro Homicide feels like it is finally allowed to sleep. Inside that sleeping building, in some quiet records room we almost never see, you can imagine a single shelf. On it, a worn Bay Harbor butcher case file leans against a row of other closed investigations. The tab is still marked with LaGuerta's careful handwriting. If you picture the folder opening, you start to see her notes tucked between the official forms. Little underlines and question marks that never made it into the final report. The story says the case is solved. The paperwork says Dexter is just another analyst who moved on. But that is not the whole story. Because in the margins, in those private annotations only she would recognize, this is the story of a woman who refused to look away. Even when everyone else had decided the nightmare was over. When you lay them all out together, every hunch she followed, every inconsistency she circled, every moment she chose justice over comfort, the file stops feeling like evidence against a monster and starts feeling like a map of her conscience. And that map is still there, resting, waiting. Like it is patient enough to be read by someone new. If you are still awake, settle in. Get comfortable with that image for a moment. The building is dark. The air is cool. Somewhere down the hall, the squad room where Dexter used to bring donuts, is just outlines of desks and chairs. The mask is off. The performance is over. And all that remains is a thin cardboard folder that quietly disagrees with the ending we were given. This is what stories like this are for. They let us walk right up to the edge of things that would be unbearable in real life. Betrayal, hidden violence, the fear that the people we trust are not what they seem. And then, step back again, safely, when the credits roll. We are going to use them over and over across a series or a season to test how we feel about trust and justice and the darkness we hope belongs only to other people. So if your mind is still turning over details, you do not have to hold on to any of them. Let the names blur, let the specific scenes fade. Just keep the sense of a long, careful investigation that someone carried almost alone. Through office politics and late nights, and a city that did not really want to know the truth. Now, let's let even that go. Let the lights of Miami recede, let the file on the shelf grow still, and imagine that somewhere, in every precinct and every life, there is always a LaGuerta watching the lines, keeping quiet notes in the margins, staying awake a little longer so that you can finally close your eyes